Good evening and welcome to the January 18, 2024 meeting of the Bloomington Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is made up of 7 volunteer Bloomington residents appointed by the City Council. Tonight we have 6, which is a quorum. The Commission advises the City Council on development proposals, development standards, long-range planning, and transportation issues. Our work is informed by the City's comprehensive plan, various district plans, and the City Code. For some items, the Commission makes a recommendation, with the City Council having final decision-making authority. There are 2 of those items tonight. In other cases, the Planning Commission can approve or deny an application subject to an appeal to the City Council, and there are none of those on the agenda. For each action item, there will be a staff report, an opportunity for the applicant to present, then time for any member of the public to provide testimony. For items that are study items, that is a staff commission interaction, and there is not public testimony until such time as the item returns for commission action. Our first order of business tonight is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand as you are able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, the first item on the agenda tonight is a public hearing for a major revision to a Bloomington Central Station plan development. This also will include preliminary and final plat. And Senior Planner Centenario has the presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. Item 1 is for, as Chair mentioned, a number of approvals for Bloomington Central Station Phase 5 or BCS 5, the 5th phase of residential development within the Bloomington Central Station plan development. So we're familiar with the Bloomington Central Station area. It's within our South Loop district, and so we look to not only the comprehensive plan, but then we also look to the South Loop district plan to inform our decisions on development within this area. And BCS has been a development that's gone in phases since the early 2000s. And this is the latest residential phase. So you can see the site circled in red, essentially just northwest of Hyatt Regency Hotel along American Boulevard and 31st Avenue. Here's a little bit better of an image, a little nearer term image from last year. You can see BCS 4 or Carbon 31 under construction in this image. And that of course included Oxendale's grocery store. And so that was a huge improvement to the neighborhood to provide a grocery retail user. This particular development is not proposing any retail, which I'll get to in a moment, and it's not proposing any affordable housing. And so we do have a code requirement related to affordable housing, but we also have the opportunity for a developer to pay fee in lieu, and that's what the property owner and applicant is seeking, to pay fee in lieu of affordable units. So Bloomington Central Station has an extensive PDP, preliminary development plan, and obviously we're not going to go into a deep discussion on the PDP itself. We're going to focus on this particular phase. And so this is the existing PDP, and I'll zoom in to show you this is what is in place today. The BCS 5 multifamily, 250 units and 6,000 square feet of retail with a mix of structured parking. So that is why the applicant is seeking a major revision, because the unit count is proposed to go down and the applicant is proposing to remove the retail element. And so what I have here is the proposed PDP with the changes being implemented with the application. And here is what's being proposed. Obviously, we go from the existing PDP, which just has, building placeholders. And with this, you can see the actual footprint of what's being proposed. You can see the walkouts, how they relate to 31st Avenue and American Boulevard. But then you also see the unit count go down from 250 to 164. And the parking configuration is a little bit different, but then the retail is no longer an element. It is directly across the street from Oxendale's. So here's the site plan for, going on to the final development plan. This is a building footprint. I'll go into more detail on the building elevations. But you can see the building footprint. That includes a lot of the structured parking, which is why the mass of the footprint is much greater. But again, this is how the building relates to the streets and its overall size. On the left side of this image, again, is another placeholder for future development. Similar to what the applicant has done previously, they would, and I'll show the plat at the end, but they would plat one lot for development and then retain an outlot for a future phase. And that's how Bloomington Central Station has developed over the years. With landscaping, it didn't really have much to comment on in terms of the landscaping plan. This is a much more urban character than other areas within Bloomington. And so naturally, when you have a very significantly sized building with as much structured parking, you have a high impervious surface. As you can see, this dark gray. So then you really have a lot of landscaping between the building and the streets. And that's what we're seeing here. A lot of street trees, foundation plantings. But in terms of code compliance, they are proposing to meet city code for trees and shrubs. We would have a landscape surety to ensure that it's planted and maintained. But again, a very, very significant amount of street trees, which helps that urban character. A couple other elements on the design that I wanted to mention, which as staff we were really happy to see. So this is a 5-story building, and on the east side of the building you can see these walkout units, which in itself we think is a really nice addition to the neighborhood, to have windows and porches and steps along the street. But when the applicant came before the city for pre-application meetings, we noticed that there was structured parking on grade level, and we expressed our concern that we really didn't want to see a blank wall because that really wouldn't add much to the public realm. But what the applicant's proposing, we think is really attractive and really meets the expectation of this development within the South Loop District. So this is that same north elevation, and so you see all these windows, all this glass, and also doors leading out to the sidewalk. And so behind that glass is the parking structure. And so we thought this was a really nice design that has that comfortable pedestrian environment instead of a blank concrete wall. Going on to other building elevations, excuse me, we've seen this mix of materials. That's pretty consistently what we see: brick, or some type of masonry, glass, stucco, metal panels, architectural concrete, and fiber cement. In the report, you read a little bit more of our commentary on the fiber cement, but the vast majority of the building is code complying. Meets our standards in terms of the mix of materials. It's within the proportions of what we call secondary materials, or like that could be ephes or fiber cement or something else. Going on to some other commentary in the staff report that I didn't get quite right is related to step back provisions. And so what you're looking at is you're looking at the footprint of the building, or the light gray, and then the dark gray is the footprint of the second level and above. And then this red area that you see in the lower right, the left image is plan view, and then the image on the right is a section view of that area. And so in the city code, we have step back provisions that ensure that a building is stepped back or set back farther the taller it is. So we don't have this canyon effect along streets. And I initially thought that this required a deviation given this red area, but it actually is within the allowance of city code. The city code has a 25% allowance when we measure the entire width of a block face, and they're at 23%. So I identified it as a deviation in the staff report, but it's actually code complying, which was good to talk to the architect about. Another building elevation, this is the south elevation. A lot of the amenity space is along the south end of the building, which makes some sense. That's closest to the retail, and so there's a good relationship between more active uses within the building. Then there's a street with street parking, and then on the other side of that is BCS 4 and Oxendales. So essentially what I'm saying is that we think it's a very well thought out building design. One more elevation view. I'll get to the courtyard areas, which was the topic of discussion in my report. But this is the one area of flexibility that staff is not supportive of, and that is those inner courtyards essentially on the west side of the site. So they're not as visible, certainly, but because the applicant isn't proposing any affordable housing, they're not eligible for exterior material allowances to allow that secondary material to go up. Essentially, in this case, they want to have more fiber cement that would normally be allowed by city code. So fiber cement is a perfectly nice material, but we contend that it is painted. It's a painted material, so inevitably it's not going to be as durable. The finish is not going to be as durable. Certainly not as much as brick or stucco or glass. And so we do have that limitation. So while we're overall very supportive of the project, the conditions as written essentially just mean the applicant has to revise these small areas of the building to meet city code. Parking, of course, is something that we look at. The parking calculation for senior housing, again, this is an age-restricted development. It's very simple. And so their parking requirement is 246 stalls. They're proposing 223. Most of that supply is coming in the form of those garage spaces. And then there are 18 spaces that are essentially allocated for this development. We asked the applicant to prepare a graphic so we're not double counting stalls between different developments. So this is all shared parking, but we want to ensure that 10 stalls don't count towards 3 different developments. But in any case, the amount of flexibility that the applicant is requesting is under 10%. Generally speaking, we find that the demand within Bloomington Central Station and South Loop District is less than city code. And so while this is flexibility that's being requested, we think the parking supply is more than sufficient for this development. And lastly, this is an image of the final plat. So this is the instrument that creates lots. And so the yellow box is where this development would be constructed. And then you can see outlot A. And that's really just the remnant that would be for BCS 6, should that move forward. And so that's we are recommending approval of all of the elements, the preliminary development plan to change those characteristics of development, the final development plan for the 164-unit senior apartment building, and then the preliminary and final plat.
Great, thank you. Questions for staff? Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Centenario, will you go back to the courtyard space and just reiterate what you said about building material and how that relates to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance?
Sure, absolutely, Commissioner. I think maybe it'd be helpful if I go to maybe this kind of makes it easier to see. So commissioners, again, this is the landscape plan, but if you can kind of see where it says level 2 courtyard, these are the 3 elevations, kind of that interior courtyard area that they're seeking flexibility for. More specifically, they're seeking to increase the amount of quote unquote secondary materials. The code outlines what secondary materials are. They want that to be significantly greater than the allowance, which is only 15% of each building elevation. And so how that relates to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance is that if you're providing affordable housing, or the more affordable housing you have, the more units, the greater percentage, the greater for affordability, there's different levels of flexibility from that standard. So if you have a very affordable development, you're eligible to have less primary materials. So essentially, it's a development incentive for affordable units. And since this application doesn't include any affordable units, we didn't really see a compelling reason why to support this flexibility.
Other questions for staff? Commissioner Goldsman.
Thank you, Chair. One question about the courtyard. Is the courtyard privately, or is it a private use, or is there public access to that courtyard?
Sure, Commissioner. This is a level 2 courtyard, so it would be private. Yeah. I'm sure folks will have parties and such, but it's for private use.
Private use. Thank you.
Commissioner Cookton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Centenario, I believe this is zoned HXR. Does the HXR zone have a transparency requirement on the ground floor?
Commissioner, it does. Let me go to. I did not include those drawings, but thank you for bringing them up. There is a transparency requirement along streets, and in the planning materials or the application materials, the applicant included graphics that measured all of the transparent materials, and by all accounts, it looked like the application was meeting the transparency requirements.
If I may, Mr. Chair, thank you. So am I understanding you can see through these windows on the parking garage, or would they be reflective? Maybe that's a question for the applicant.
Sure. Commissioner, that's a great question. I don't know all the characteristics of what they're proposing. It is an important question, though, to ensure that there is some transparency and it's not a false window.
Okay. I'll ask the applicant. Thank you.
Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, Chair. Just at a high level, how many more phases are there planned for Bloomington Central Station, and how is the development or the main plan progressing as originally intended?
Sure, Commissioner. That's also a very good question. So I have the proposed preliminary development plan. So you can see where phases have been developed. They have a lot more detail. They're precise in terms of their building footprints. And Health Partners has existed in this area for quite some time. And Reflections was developed shortly thereafter, or not shortly thereafter, but was the beginning of this Bloomington Central Station vision. And that was obviously two glass condo towers. I'd have to look to Glenn to kind of reach back in his memory and remember what those original PDPs envisioned. But I suspect it was more height, more building height, more towers, greater proportion than what we're seeing now. And what's been developed is, in terms of residential, has been 5- and 6-story residential buildings. The 3 previous residential phases are 6-story, essentially 5 stories on one level of concrete style development. And this one that we're reviewing tonight is 5 levels.
Yeah. Chair Roman, Commissioner Curry, some of the major changes over the years at Bloomington Central Station with their preliminary development plan, probably the first on the far eastern side. Originally, there was proposals that the residential units would be in more tower format, similar to Reflections. What they ran into was just financial realities that the cost of that construction was not penciling out. It was not financially viable. So they switched to more of a wood frame design for the 2 phases on the east side to the north of that. The density did not change, and in fact, I think it even increased a little bit relative to the previous plan, but the style of the units changed. And then on the western side, the main change has been, over time, the conversion of office space. When this was originally proposed, there was a lot of office buildings proposed, which market conditions do not support anymore. So several of those planned office buildings have been converted through plan amendments to residential.
Thank you. So then, I guess just in terms of total units or yield, are we on track? Has everything previously been at the expected density that we thought was going to be developed, or has it been under? Or
Yes, Chair Roman, Commissioner Curry. So looking at the overall numbers throughout the entire development, the number of units has gone way up, and the amount of office space has gone down substantially.
Okay, thank you.
Questions for staff? Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak on this item? Oh, sorry, I missed. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. I had one more question for staff. Commissioner Curry.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. I was also just going to ask about the retail, if we have developed the amount of retail that was originally expected or if we were under what was intended.
Sure. Chair Roman, Commissioner, overall, as the different iterations of the plan, the amount of retail spaces fluctuated, but overall, what's proposed now is significantly less retail than what was originally envisioned. And again, that's the applicant can go into more detail on why, but it's just understanding the market conditions didn't support more retail than what's being proposed.
Okay. Thank you.
And then kind of following up on Commissioner Curry's earlier question about how many phases. So looking at this, obviously the dashed items are the items that are not developed yet. And it's somewhat mixed to read, but how many do we have left of the uncompleted phases here? Is there 2, looks like, maybe 3?
Sure, Chair Roman, in terms of residential, in terms of the use characteristics,
Or anything, quite frankly, because we know it's been evolving.
Yeah, currently what's being proposed right now is one more phase of residential development, and that's immediately west of the site that you're reviewing tonight. In terms of office, they're showing actually 4 more office phases, and then along with those office phases are accompanying parking structures. There is some more retail that's proposed close or essentially across the street from the grocery store. And then, in the future, if these office spaces materialize, there could very well be addition of some ground level retail. It's not shown here, but again, PDPs really do evolve over time, given what is buildable.
Thank you. Anything else? All right. Now would the applicant like to speak on this item?
Hello. My name is Joy Jerem. I'm here with my colleague Johnny Meeker on behalf of McGough. Thank you for having us here tonight. So we are really excited about this active adult project on the BCS neighborhood. We have recently finished our third 400 unit plus market rate project in that neighborhood, and we think that this would be a great addition. We're excited about the community and all the amenities that we hope to have in this building. ESG, Ryan Samsa is our architect, is on the line. He is in North Carolina, unable to be here with us, so we're glad he could dial in. The building will have a full program manager. There are a number of amenities that you would expect in any current market rate building, plus the addition of an indoor pool. We hope that this becomes, for those that are looking to downsize, this is their next home.
Yep.
In regards to all the materials in the building that Mr. Centenario pointed out, it was designed with this demographic in mind. With that said, up on the courtyard level, the reason why we had pursued the design flexibility to more of a fiber cement panel is that most of these people will be coming from single-family homes. It feels like a backyard. It feels like you're in a neighborhood. I have fiber cement on my single-family home. It's 18 years old, and my garage is against the backyard where I have kids banging it with balls and running into it, and it looks great. So I haven't seen issues. We would like to request the opportunity to pursue continuing dialogue with staff on that flexibility in the courtyard. I think, Ryan, I don't know if you can speak, but if you can, if there's anything you wanted to add. Do you have to unmute him? Or?
Yeah, Ryan Samsa, if you'd like, you can unmute yourself now.
Hi, good evening, Commissioners. It's Ryan Samsa with ESG Architects. As Joy mentioned, we're at 500 Washington Avenue in Minneapolis. And just to add to that request for flexibility, we're kind of imagining that the intent of the exterior material standard is to just ensure a positive impact on the public by guaranteeing a certain amount of high quality building finish. And kind of based on the fact that these elevations are, we think we're meeting that intent based on the fact that these 3 upper courtyard elevations are largely not visible. And really not affecting the public realm at all. I mean, first of all, there's the vertical separation, that courtyard and those elevations are elevated 14 to 22 feet above grade that's adjacent. The west elevation is the only one that directly faces a right of way, and that's 30th to the west, and it's more than 400 feet away from that right of way. And the north and south elevations, while not facing directly a right of way, are still like very far removed from American and 80 and a half to north and south respectively, by more than 200 feet in the case of both. So given that vertical separation and kind of the distance from where they can be viewed in plan, it makes sense just because they really are virtually invisible. And I guess furthermore, like for any potential oblique views, like from American or 80th looking kind of diagonally at the project, we've essentially continued the primary material proportions or percentages around the corner for the first 35 plus feet. So we've got 95% primary material, where for the portion that you could possibly see obliquely. So ostensibly, the kind of secondary materials, that high concentration is relegated to like a zone that's not visible by the public. And with that, I'll turn it back to Joy or Johnny. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ryan. I don't
Thank you,
have anything
Ryan.
else.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. We're really excited to keep the momentum going in BCS. If you have any questions for either Joy or myself.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant. Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are regarding the market in both the city of Bloomington and in the region. What is the absorption of senior housing in either the market, either the region or the city of Bloomington? And then to add on that, what are you seeing in terms of senior projects and the parking absorption in those projects? And are you seeking deviations in other locations?
Yeah, so this is our only senior housing project at the moment. Absorption compared to your typical market rate project, either Carbon 31 just to the south or Fenley just to the east, those are typically faster. Excuse me. Your turnover, though, in terms of leasing is more frequent, but in the typical person who's moving into the senior housing, they're selling their home, they're choosing to rent to really be in a community that's activated and programmed for them. So the property managers refer to them as very sticky. They tend to stay there for 8, 10, 12 years. It's really their home, their community. Absorption is slower. So having a building that's about 120 to 180 units is the sweet spot. Because you get on average about 10 units a month when you just flatline it over the year. So if you've got a 300 unit building, that's almost 3 years to lease up. So they're a little smaller, more programmed, more community-esque. In terms of parking, from our property manager we're working with, they're a big national property manager, Gray Star. They typically see about 1.25 is their recommendation. So we're above where they are, or we're above what they would recommend the minimum is that they'd be comfortable to lease a building.
Thank you.
Yep.
Questions for the applicant. Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a number of comments, so I'm just going to start ripping them off here. What was the decision to go to 5 stories instead of 6?
I think back to Johnny's point, just trying to hit that sweet spot in talking with a number of different consultants that do active adult projects, just that 164, and given our site plan and knowing we had to wrap that garage as much as we could with activated spaces, that's where we ended up, was 164.
Just so I'm understanding, did you feel constrained to have to be at 5? Would you have preferred 6, or is this where you want to be?
It's what works best on the site. I think this is what we want to be. It feels appropriate.
Very well.
If,
Could you speak to the reduction of or elimination of retail space? Why did you do that?
Yeah, so retail, as we all know, is very difficult. And we just opened up the Oxendales Market right across the street. So that is about 15,000 square feet. It's a great amenity to South Loop. It's a great amenity to BCS. And, we'd really like to see that grocery store thrive and succeed. And bringing on additional units to help them to have density on site and shoppers is important. So we're really focusing on them succeeding, not trying to bring additional retail in at this time.
Okay. Could you speak to the transparency of the windows around the garage space?
yes, they will be transparent.
Well.
Yep.
I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, Chair. So, in terms of the retail, is there do you have any concern about the retail being leased up? Then you would expect that if you developed retail, it would be leased.
Commission members, that is something that we haven't studied in the past year or so. We would need to do more research to really understand, what retail we could be bringing to the site and what are the market needs. But we have not contemplated that for this project.
Thank you. So then, do you have any understanding as to what the level of vacancy is for retail in the South Loop area?
I do not. I would guess within the South Loop, whatever the Mall of America's vacancy, because it's so large, is probably what the vacancy is.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yep.
Commissioner Cookton.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I could help Commissioner Curry and ask Mr. Markegard what the take-in rate of the existing retail we have in Bloomington Central Station.
Yes, Chair Roman, Commissioner Cookton, within Bloomington Central Station itself, we just have essentially 2 retail spaces or non-residential spaces, not counting the hotel. One is the Oxendales grocer, which is, fully occupied. Mm-hmm. The other is the former coffee shop spot, which my understanding is currently vacant, although I don't know if there's any updates on that, but that one is vacant.
Commissioner Issa.
Thank you, Chair. I know you mentioned kind of the vacancy and how you guys downsize the units, overall units. Are you guys working with the provider, or is the provider working with MDH or DHS, whatever licensing agency it is, to kind of speed up the process beforehand, or is it after the site is built, then you guys, or the provider, I should say, would be working to kind of get things going?
So I think this is not an assisted living. This is active adult, 55 plus. So it's just age restricted. So it's really market rate housing with just a restricted age.
Okay, I see. Thank you for
Okay.
that clarification.
Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question. I am assuming there's a cost to using primary versus secondary material, and ballpark, what would that cost? Is there a cost barrier to changing that courtyard material to primary versus secondary?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question. And yes, there is a cost barrier to that. to it. We are studying different materials that fit into the primary. We are analyzing metal panel to be considered primary material. The city has some restrictions on the type of gauge and warranty that can go with that. So I don't have a figure in my head because we've gone through so many different numbers trying to figure out how we're going to clad that area. And this was the architect's first wish, so we're trying to move around there, but we can be prepared to answer that next. But I'd say it's maybe $10 a square foot difference. I just don't know the material takeoff.
Commissioner Goldsman.
Thank you, Chair. If staff could bring up the aerial view of the map, specifically showing the additional development opportunity. So I know to is it the west? I'm bad with cardinal directions here, where that parking lot is. We're looking at another potential development, correct? In that development, is there any retail space opportunity, or is it strictly residential?
Commissioners, the PDP that they're proposing shows it as 100% residential. Again, that could evolve, but they're not proposing any retail space on the BCS 6 phase.
Great, thank you for answering the question.
And I know there was some discussion in the materials we have, but on the south elevation facing 88th and a half, there is, at the southeast corner, there is a different setback at the southwest corner, but then there's a fairly significant setback in what I assume is intended to be the front of the building. Talk about that. I understand there was some reference to utility easement, but I think generally how we have something that is not aligned with the urban character of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I can address that, and then if Ryan could be unmute himself to be prepared to also help me, that'd be great. So on the south side of the building, that is our grade level courtyard there. We hope to activate that space as well with some grilling stations and some furniture and turf. But the reason why we held the building back a little bit is to gather those views of the park that are right across the street. That I think was one motivating factor for us. Also in that area, the Oxendale's parking is head in. It's very close. So just to kind of give that a little bit of a break. Ryan, do you have a probably more eloquent response than that?
I think you did a fine job, Joy. That's exactly what we did, and just at grade by pulling what you can see is the pool room back. It is a gesture towards the Central Station Park, but also kind of provides additional at-grade landscaping opportunity that you see we kind of took advantage of in the landscaping plan. So, other than that gesture, our kind of forward-facing faces of the building are pushed out almost as far as we can push them out, so that we kind of actively engage the street and create that premier pedestrian experience that BCS is that's been like a signature of the previous BCS developments. So,
thank you. Other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Cookton.
Mr. Chair, thanks. Ms. Jerem, the walkout units, is that something you like, or is that my city staff colleagues pushing you to do that?
I actually like those units. They're, for people with a pet, those are great units to have. There's a park right down the street. We also, speaking from the construction-wise, it works out well. We've got a nice concrete podium there. Those units don't have to stack with the ones above for plumbing lines, so we can create something special on the street.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. You're good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This item is a public hearing, so I would invite any member of the public who would like to testify on this item to the podium for a 3-minute testimony. Seeing none and seeing none online who are not staff, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The public hearing is closed. Discussion on the proposal. Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to start out this conversation. I appreciate the additional information from the applicant regarding absorption of senior units, because my perception is that they are a little slower than market rate. So I appreciate the reasoning behind that. Ideally, I would like to see a 5/1 building, but I understand that an additional level of units might creep into the absorption numbers and work out not in favor of the project moving forward. So I understand the reduction in units. I am comfortable with the parking deviation, though I would really like to see some affordability component with the parking deviation, and so I'm hesitant about that, even though I know that parking is less of a demand, particularly in an area with a lot of public transit. I am also comfortable with the requirement of changing the courtyard to more primary material versus secondary material. I think that is makes a lot of sense. And other than that, I am in support of the project.
Commissioner Goldsman.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few comments and just thinking about housing in general. I agree. I'm somewhat saddened that we don't have an affordability component, but I also look at this as other housing options for people that live here in Bloomington. We have a lot of residents that have been living in Bloomington for many years, and they're in their homes and are looking for additional options for downsizing out of a single-family home or other options. And I like giving this demographic opportunities to take that step to something that's a little bit more manageable or within their abilities. But I also look at it from the perspective of it gives people the option first to move, but also to open up housing for families. Think about Commissioner Corman, who is here. She always talked about housing for families, bringing in families with children that can support our schools and our communities as a whole. So I think this is a decent fit. I understand the challenges with retail, which I asked about the future development, if that's something that maybe in the future, if the conditions change, could we not kick the can down the road, but is there opportunity to move it to the other building? Potentially that could be something we could look at. I think overall, I'm just happy to see development. We've had a couple of applicants come to us looking for delays in development, and I'm glad to see that we're not seeing that delay with this. So overall, I'll be in support of the applications as staff has recommended.
Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would generally agree. I think, I would like to see additional retail in the area. I visited the grocery store today, and it was fairly quiet. So I see the value in wanting to support them, obviously. But I think if you want to create a neighborhood atmosphere, you got to have more than a grocery store and a coffee shop. So, and I think bringing complementary retail, I mean, most retail, I think, in Bloomington is anchored by a grocery store. So, there should be complementary retail to this. But so, I think as long as there is, a finer lens pointed on more retail on the future phases of the area, I would be in support of the development.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, my instinct, my reaction to this is, you know, there's some good things here. I don't have a problem with the with the treatment of the transparency and the parking on American Boulevard. That by nature, American Boulevard is a more pedestrian hostile environment than some of the interior streets in BCS. So, no, not quite the same, but it's not you know, not terrible. The walkouts are a new thing. I don't have an opinion on that. I think it's worth trying. I'm struggling with, the idea, folks who've listened over time, the idea of parking flexibility is fewer parking generally I'm isn't supportive, because I think in general as a city we are overparked and our standards are too high. I think parking flexibility makes sense in a denser area where people are walking, but where are they walking to? They might walk across the street to a park, but we're shaving out retail. You know, the development across the street cut the retail by, I think, a quarter. This one is eliminating retail entirely from this phase and the next phase. So people were left to take the train to the mall, which it's not really a place that you go to run an errand or to pick up a couple things, or to be in community. It's a destination. It's an attraction. It's not community. No knock on the mall. The mall is a great asset. It's just not neighborhood. So once again, we're stripping out the things that might make this a neighborhood versus just some more places to live. So I'm not a fan of the treatment on 80th and a half. I'm not a fan of the elimination of retail. I think we heard that the developer is interested in supporting the success of the grocery store, but another type of retail does not detract from a grocery store. Another grocery store would, or a Walgreens or some sort of convenience drug store. Sure, that would, but there are a lot of types of retail. And when the developer is the developer of both, you can be a little bit selective about what you put there. So if there were other things that were aligned with what we want for this whole area, I could be convinced to offer the flexibility on the courtyard. But there's a lot of things here that are not what we would like to see in this area. And then, again, not about this project specifically, but I would be remiss if, other than sidewalks, the other thing I bring up all the time is, you know, we are building senior housing with different standards and different requirements, and we will be overbuilt with senior housing at some point. Demographics tell us that, and we don't yet have thoughts on how that gets reused or changed. And I know that that's not a knock, because it's not something that we've asked to solve anytime soon. But we continue to build these things that are not necessarily what can be reused in the long term as under our current standards. This would not be an apartment building that would meet code or standards. I shouldn't say code, would not meet our standards for general population. So have not made up my mind, but I'm not leaning toward a yes on this. Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair. If I may ask a question of staff. In our work plan for 2024-2025, we did talk about parking standards and multifamily standards. Can you, Mr. Centenario, talk a little bit about both of those projects and how they would potentially impact if those were to have been entirely flushed out, theoretically? What would that look like in terms of an impact on this proposal?
Before you answer that question, it was something I was going to plan to bring up in our policy and issue update, but we did, since our last meeting, I did take the work plan with staff to the council and the multifamily standards update here.
But the parking standards is still in there.
Parking standards is still in.
Okay, so just specifically for parking, would this impact this application at all?
Sure, Commissioners. Is the question this project, if it moves entirely through the entitlement process, what would the impact be? Or what would the impact be if we did all that work and then applied new standards to the site?
Yes.
Okay.
Second version.
Yeah, that's really, really hard to say, because I don't think we've done a ton of work in this regard. Generally speaking, parking requirements are going down. Some communities, I personally, I have my personal feelings on it, but some communities are eliminating parking requirements altogether. I suspect that's not going to be the case here. But generally, the parking demand that we're seeing today is just slightly reduced from when it was even 10 years ago. So we'll see what studying that bears out. But my suspicion is that the parking requirements could be reduced a little bit. And therefore, the parking requirement on this site maybe would then be entirely compliant and wouldn't need a deviation, or maybe the deviation is smaller than what they're proposing.
So, and the parking deviation request is just under 10%, that's correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
The other thing that when I was talking about, the, approach to the curb line and the amenities and the retail and all the things, it goes also to, it's an interesting tension that we find ourselves sometimes working with is, we are a suburban community and we have homes that are built a certain way and lots that are a certain way, but in this part of the city, this is a part of the city that is envisioned differently. And that's how we meet growth and we meet some of that while also preserving and reinvesting and protecting the parts of the city that are different. So that was the part I forgot to mention. Other discussion. Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start with the material flexibility, and I'm in favor of staff's recommendation on that. There's no precedent whatsoever of this commission or the city council giving flexibility on that. Honestly, I would encourage the applicant to not pursue it. It's not going to happen. So I'm fine with staying with precedent with the material as recommended by staff. Regarding the walkout units, it's actually not new for Bloomington Central Station. Almost all of the previous developments have that. I'll be honest with you, I don't like them. I think they're a bit of a nuisance, to be completely honest. There's a lot of shovels and kids' toy equipment and stuff that gets left on these things, and I don't know, perhaps some people move to this neighborhood to not see kids' toy equipment and things. And so I personally am not a fan of walkouts. It's not going to stop me from, whatever, but I don't like walkouts personally, particularly in this neighborhood. I don't think they fit the character of what this neighborhood is meant to be. We've got a lot of really pretty landscaping and the sidewalks are nice, and then the walkout units, frankly, are a bit of a nuisance, in my opinion. Moving on. I don't like the elimination of retail. I totally agree with Commissioner Curry. I think complementary retail is the right answer here. If you had a salon or something else that's driving traffic, they're naturally going to go to the grocery store and get a few things on their way home. I'm not a developer, but I don't understand the argument of stealing one retail from the next. I suspect, and I'm purely speculating here, but I suspect that they're having trouble filling retail. The coffee shop space has been empty for 6 to 9 months, and it doesn't sound like there's a ton of movement on that. And so I suspect that's the answer. But I would like to see retail here. I think we should try harder or try differently, or maybe it needs to be quick service and something instead of something really cute that we love even more. But like perhaps we need a Chipotle or something to drive traffic to help that grocery store. If the grocery store is, I don't know how it's doing financially, but if it's not doing well, maybe we do need to consider something that's more quick service. I'm not saying McDonald's, but perhaps something different than the super cute coffee shop. I don't know. That's just me speaking as a resident, not a developer. This proposal, Mr. Chair, feels a lot like 700 American, which we saw a couple of years ago. I feel almost the exact same way about it. It's a little different, but the things that are the same is it's 5-story on, or in this case, 4 stories on podium. And I wasn't a fan of it at 700 American. I felt like that parcel was one of our most premium, and I was disappointed to see, in my opinion, relatively low density senior housing to go on that site, because I think that works in so many places. We're going to talk about Lyndale at some point tonight, and that is where we should be seeing 5 stories of senior housing. that's the place. To put it on one of our most premium and desirable parcels in the city, I think is disappointing for me. And it has nothing to do with seniors. I actually think seniors are going to help the neighborhood. There's nobody more loyal to retail in their neighborhood than a senior, right? If we had a coffee shop, you can imagine the senior coffee group. They're going to be super loyal to that grocery store. They're not going to go to Costco to save whatever, $5. They don't care. They're going to go to the local place. So I actually think seniors are good for the retail in the neighborhood, but that's not to say I think it's the perfect fit here. This is certainly more walkable than 700 American, which makes me feel more comfortable. But again, not a developer, but it seems to me that senior housing is just like the lowest hanging fruit in the development world right now. And to see it go here in what I believe to be maybe the most premium parcel we have in the city right now, I find that to be disappointing. The other concern I have, and this is actually a real concern for me now after hearing the conversation tonight, is the windows around the parking. I didn't catch that when I was studying this application for the meeting tonight, but the whole point of putting glazing on the street front in these urban neighborhoods of ours is to activate the street. And I got to tell you, I don't think looking at parked cars activates the street. I think we're totally missing the intent of that. And I don't know. Maybe there's nothing we can do about that from a code perspective. If Mr. Centenario has any thoughts on that, he can let me know. But that's something we might need to look at as a city, is not allowing that. I appreciate the creativity. It's better than, I guess, looking into a garage, but not really. It's a parking garage. I don't want to look at cars, and I like cars. And I just don't think that meets the intent of HXR. You're supposed to be looking at the pool, the fitness center, the restaurant, the retail space. That's the point of having transparency on the ground level, not to look at parked cars. I think that's a huge disappointment here in our most walkable neighborhood. I find that to be disappointing. Unfortunately, where I'm left tonight is the same place I was at 700 American, is that we have findings to make and that landowners have rights. And it doesn't matter whether I like an application or not, because they have rights to do what they want to do if it's code compliant. And they're largely code compliant here. And so even though I don't like this application, I'm not sure I have any authority to recommend denial of it. And I know you said you were questioning, and I appreciate that discernment. And if you think, and I'm not challenging you, but if you feel you have something in the findings that we can point to recommend denial of this application, I'd be very interested in that. But from where I sit, I don't think I can find anything.
Commissioner Goldsman.
I have a question for staff around the window glazing, because I think you sparked something in my mind. Is we have these windows, or the transparency in the windows, right? So these will be transparent? Okay, so there's no glazing on them. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just thinking out loud here.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Goldsman. Glazing is a fancy architecture term for glass. So it is glass, but it's transparent, which is what I don't like.
So not frosted.
I don't think it's frosted or reflective. It's going to be clear glass, and you're going to be able to see cars during the day.
Ah, okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, Chair. I guess just looking back at this plan again, I mean, if we are so concerned about the retail, I mean, the outlot right next to it is planned for 250 residential units as well with no retail. So if retail, I mean, is there a reason? I understand there's a substation across the street, but other than that, is there a reason why we decided to build a building that was intended to have retail with no retail, where there's one that's intended to not have retail right next to it?
Mr. Chair, I may be able to add a little insight to that. And the premium piece, the centerpiece of Bloomington Central Station, is the park and the train station. And so having it in Phase 5, the one we're looking at tonight, which is directly off the park, I think you're more likely to have that pedestrian traffic to go there instead of walking like down the street to Phase 6. And west of Phase 6, there's really not much activity. And so I can see why, when the first version of this, or the most recent version of this PDP came out, why it was more desirable to be in Phase 5, because you're going to have a lot more visibility and pedestrian traffic. Phase 6, I think, would be more of a stretch to have it there than Phase 5, but that's just me sitting on the sidelines here.
Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make some comments on the retail because I am of a different opinion on that. As far as I understand, in terms of development, typically when you put mixed use, where it's one building with two uses, retail, housing, in your pro forma, you're basically, you're under the assumption that you're not getting any rent. You're not getting very little rent for that space because the chances of you having to flip it, similar to what they had to do with the coffee shop, is high. So I believe in mixed use. I don't believe in vertical mixed use. I believe in horizontal mixed use, and that the uses around here could potentially use more retail. But I don't necessarily believe that the requirement should be that the retail is directly below housing. I don't necessarily believe that that works very well when you look at other places in the region. The success rate of that is not great, unless you're, let's say you're on Excelsior Boulevard. But even then, the absorption of that retail has taken, I don't know, 15 years. And so my concern is if we want activation at the street level, it's, in my opinion, it's better, even though Commissioner Cookton doesn't like the walkout units, better to have walkout units and an activated street than an empty storefront for a period of time. And so I'm comfortable eliminating the retail here with the hopes that we can find some horizontal mixed use within this space. I don't know what that looks like. I don't have an answer. I'm not a developer. But that would be my hope. I do believe that, there could be some additional retail absorbed in this area. I just don't necessarily think it has to be tied to multifamily units.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the comments, Commissioner Albrecht. You're far more educated in this than I am, and so I always appreciate your thoughts. One of the things I actually talked to Mr. Centenary about earlier this morning was, in HXR, do we require retail? And the answer is no, we don't. And so what they've put before us is code compliant from that perspective. And so, as much as I would like to see retail, you would not. It's okay to disagree on that. They don't have to. And so it's the Planning Commission is not getting what we want based on our wishes. It's about, do these meet code? And from my perspective, generally speaking, they do meet code. And I think that's why I will be supporting the application.
Additional discussion. Commissioner Curry.
As a newer person on the, thank you, Chair. As a newer person on the commission, are we just here to evaluate whether something's code compliant or not? Otherwise, do we need a planning commission to go through these? Or what are we doing here?
Fair question. And I will ask the planning manager to kind of give us a quick refresher on the pyramid of discretion. I was going to say authority, but it's not discretion.
Yeah, Chair Roman, Commissioner Curry. Yeah, if you look at the realm of applications you review, some have a large amount of discretion, others a little. This type of application I would characterize being somewhat in the middle, because you do have some flexibility requests, which adds some discretion. However, if there are concerns on the level of flexibility, typically the remedy would be not to support that particular flexibility request. For example, here we have parking deviation. So the remedy would be, well, provide more parking, and you could do that via condition, or with the exterior materials, the remedy would be a condition requiring that code be met. So I would characterize the discretion certainly not as high, but there's some discretion given that it's planned development and that there's deviations that are requested.
So, given that there are 3 requests for action, correct? Probably the most discretion is whether or not to recommend a revision to the development plan, correct?
Chair Roman, looking at the 3 applications individually, on the preliminary development plan, there's actually no deviations requested. It meets all the parameters, like in terms of how many, the density, the floor area ratio standard, that's all code compliant, so no deviation requests there.
Okay.
On the final development plan, there are the 2 deviation requests discussed, and then the 3rd application being the plat. A plat is at the lowest level of discretion,
Yep.
and it's really just a quasi-judicial review of, does it meet the standards? Can we make the findings? So the most discretion would be on that final development plan application. But again, the remedy, if you had concerns about the flexibility proposed, would typically be to not offer that flexibility.
Commissioner Cookton.
Mr. Chair, thanks. Commissioner Curry, the way I think about this is you have to put yourself in the position of the applicant too. And as much as I may not like this application, landowners have rights, and not that you're proposing this, but applicants need protection that we're not going to sit up here and just say, you're going to do what we want because I'm a planning commissioner. We don't have that type of authority. And so city code and whatever is set up so that we have to make these findings so that we're fair to applicants, not only this application, but we're fair across applicants. And that's really what we're positioned up here to do, is to be fair and protect the public by making sure these are code compliant applications. And so on some applications, we have lots of discretion, whether it's, like that pawn shop application. We had tons of discretion on that because it's a different type of application. But in this case, with there being a single applicant who has a largely code compliant application, we, unfortunately, in my opinion, but not unfortunately, rightly, we can't sit up here and just do what we want. We have to be fair. And so that's how I've arrived at my decision tonight.
Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After hearing a little bit of the discussion about the parking deviation, I am comfortable with that. And I am not comfortable with the deviation of using secondary material instead of primary where required. So I am comfortable moving forward as the as staff recommendation.
Again, I think the the sense of what we've been discussing is good. I think it's good to have these discussions about, on the high level what our visions are. And I know we have the South Loop plan coming back on the work plan this year. And again, I think Commissioner Cookton puts it best. There are things that can be done whether we think they're the best idea or not. So with that, I would, if we could get a slide up, I would entertain Commissioner Cookton.
One other comment, Mr. Chair, and it's just, I guess, been a learning experience for me with this application is how little discretion we have with PDPs. This applicant, I don't mean to single them out like that, but we've had a PDP just change, and it just changed. And I thought we would have some authority to say, no, you told us you were going to do this and we're going to hold you to it. And I learned we can't do that. And so I would, encourage us to consider that as we move forward, that we shouldn't on a hypothetical future application with a plan development. We shouldn't make decisions on an individual application based on the hopes of a future PDP. I think we now need to recognize that PDPs are not good for making decisions of today. I think what PDPs are good for is, have we sized the sewer correctly? As city works, make sure we've got whatever, enough lanes on the street to support future development. I think that's what PDPs are for. But for something like, oh, I'll bend on retail this time because we're going to get it in the next phase, it's been a learning experience for me that we should not do that. And we need to treat applications as they stand today and not put faith in PDPs because they don't hold nearly as much whatever. They don't hold their future value like I thought they did.
And I think that's, I know I've had comments in the past as we've had things that have come before us that were single parcel plan developments, which I've felt are perhaps not used in the way that they should be. They're oftentimes used to avoid variances and not complying with things. So I think in general, it may be worth re-examining how we use them and how frequently we use them and what they require. On that note, if anyone would like to make a motion, Commissioner Goldsman,
If I may, I'd like to make a motion.
please.
In case PL 2023-179, having been able to make the required findings, I move to recommend City Council approval of a major revision to the BCS Preliminary Development Plan to reduce the residential unit count from 250 to 164 and to remove the retail component from the BCS 5 multifamily located at 3001 American Blvd E, subject to the conditions and code requirements attached to the staff report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to recommend major revision of the preliminary development plan. Any further discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Commissioner Curry. Oh, or whoever wants to make the next motion. Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair. In case PL 2023-179, having been able to make the required findings, I move to recommend City Council approval of final development plans for a 5-story, 164-unit senior apartment building located at 3001 American Blvd East, subject to the conditions and code requirements attached to the staff report.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to recommend approval of final development plans at the subject property. Any further discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Commissioner Cookton.
Mr. Chair, in case PL 2023-179, having been able to make the required findings, I move to recommend the City Council adopt a resolution approving a Type 3 preliminary and final plat to create one developable lot to accommodate a residential development and an outlot for future development, subject to the conditions and code requirements in the staff report.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to recommend preliminary and final plat. Any further discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. These items will appear on the January 29th City Council agenda in the consent report. Thank you. Item number 2 is a public comment opportunity on the city's proposed electric vehicle infrastructure plan, and Development Coordinator Hanson has the presentation.
Mr. Chair, could I just clarify that's going on the consent agenda of the City Council?
That is correct. For the City Council, individual members of the City Council can pull items off of the consent agenda for further discussion.
Perfect. All right. Good evening, commissioners. I'm here this evening to discuss with you the electric vehicle infrastructure plan. I was before this body here earlier this winter with the draft plan. You guys provided me some great feedback, so I wanted to give you kind of an update on where we're at and where we're planning on going. As I mentioned, we were before you, I was before you here earlier this year. Since we met with you, we did meet with the Sustainability Commission and City Council in a discussion format to get some feedback on the draft plan. We took the comments that we received from all three bodies, incorporated that into the final plan, which was attached to your agenda items this evening. The plan is complete with the one exception of the acknowledgements page in there has not been filled in yet. SRF is still working on drafting that, and we'll have that included before the plan is before the council here at the end of the month. We presented the final plan to the Sustainability Commission on Tuesday evening, and we're looking for a recommendation of acceptance from them, which we did receive. So before you this evening with the same request of the Planning Commission, and then we hope to go to the City Council on January 29th for the final plan and hopefully final acceptance by the council. So the next steps for the plan, assuming adoption by the council at the end of the month, would be to form an EV infrastructure implementation group. And that group would first start working on creating a matrix for implementation based on the action items that are identified in the plan. I envision this being similar to kind of the group that we have together for the Lyndale Avenue retrofit plan. We have staff that works on that, and we meet on an annual basis and kind of track the progress to make sure that we're moving forward the action items that were identified in those plans. We're not just having a plan and sitting on a shelf collecting dust. And then we'd start to bring in actually those action items before the bodies, the commission, the council, for adoption as we kind of move forward in our work. And also one thing that was added to the executive summary that was a suggestion of the council was to reevaluate the plan in full in 5 years. Given the changing technologies, just to make sure the plan is still current and relevant. And if there's different fuel technologies that come on board the next 5 years, we want to make sure we're not working off a plan that is a technology that maybe got left behind. So just giving us that checkpoint to make sure it's still relevant. And also if we need to make any additions or updates to the plan at that time, that would be a trigger to do so. So that is included in the executive summary as part of the final plan before you this evening. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, the final plan is before you, seeking a motion of recommendation of acceptance to the council, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. This is excellent work. Questions for staff? My only, and there was a section in the report where you talked about the different interfaces for charging vehicles. And I think I would just make sure, again, I was reading it quicker than I should have. I think I would make sure that somehow we capture that is kind of settling in one direction. And I think Stellantis is the only company that hasn't adopted NACS, and we should just make sure that if we're putting any resources publicly towards something, that we are putting it in the right place of where things are headed, not where things have been.
Excellent.
Any other questions for staff before we have the public comment opportunity? Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, I might have missed it, but it appears that in the plan that it doesn't actually get to the point of actually installing any infrastructure or purchasing any vehicles. So the next 3 to 5 years, nothing might happen. Is that the case, or?
So the plan itself does not, the adoption of the plan does not also adopt infrastructure improvements with the plan. But the plan does is it gives staff a roadmap to actually start to work on those items. So that's what I envision with the when you look at the EV infrastructure implementation work group. So based on the feedback that I received from the boards as well as the council, I have an idea. I want to work with staff to make sure that we're on the same page as far as what we need to bring forward first to get this ball rolling, because there's a lot of different components to this, so it's not going to be overnight. But that's the idea, is once the plan's adopted, we'll actually get into the nuts and bolts and kind of where the rubber meets the road and actually you'll see things before you that'll actually lead towards either implementation, code changes, those type of things that we can do. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you for that. At this point, this is an item available for a public comment opportunity. So I would open the public comment opportunity. Go ahead and sign in, and you know the drill.
I don't know how to address you all, commissioners. Is that what I say?
That would be fine.
My name is Bruce Colton. I learned about this meeting about 4 hours ago, I guess. So I'm here just to give my input. It's primarily factual, but I don't think it's going to be something that most people are going to like to hear, but they should. All right. So I'd like to give a nicer presentation, but I'm going to read off this paper because I know I've got limited time. And I don't know what the time is, but
Generally 3 minutes.
Okay, I got my bachelor's and master's degrees and completed my doctoral studies at the University of Minnesota, electrical engineering. I was the Director of Research and Technology at Control Data General Dynamics Corporation. In that capacity, I had 6 doctoral level meteorologists working for me on advanced climate and forecasting technology. I know a little something about the subject of climate change and green energy. The only reason to be discussing EVs is because of a perception, not necessarily a fact, that we are facing a climate emergency. Before you even think about me or dismissing me as just another climate denier, remind yourselves of my introduction, please. But I add this. 97% of scientists believe that the temperature of the atmosphere is rising, but only moderately and naturally as would be expected. But here's what they won't tell you, and that is that 98% of those same scientists do not believe that it has anything to do with human industrialization or lifestyle factors. I've got 2 minutes to tell you that the EVs will make things worse, not better. There are many studies that never see the light of day in our highly information-controlled, media-driven environment. But out of hundreds of studies, just look at France's High Climate Council study. They claimed they would achieve carbon emission reductions and, in fact, increased emissions somewhere as high as 70% over what they even reported or even initially reported, because they did more accurate accounting later. A review of 50 academic studies found estimates for embedded emissions. That means the emissions that you accumulate while you're building things, building electric vehicles, building their batteries. To fabricate a single EV battery ranged as high as 20 tons of CO2. That's about the amount used in a lifetime of an efficient vehicle, an efficient fuel-burning vehicle, conventional car. Remember that that's before the EVs are delivered to the customer. To make one EV battery requires 250 tons of Earth's crust to be mined. That's about 500,000 pounds. That's for one EV battery. If you go on the internet, you're going to see all sorts of fact-checking and just, putting it down and saying, oh, this is expanded. But this is from multiple scientific papers. It's not from Australia. I went and looked today. I couldn't believe it. But so 5,000 pounds of earth for one battery. Then you have to transport about 50 tons of ore to process and separate out the targeted materials. There are many studies, results, all of which show the folly of thinking EV vehicles are going to help the environment. I haven't even talked about the energy density where EVs lose, fossil fuel being 17 times more efficient. Remember, you have to charge them also. Coal burning. Burning coal, anyone want to you do that to create electricity? Anyway, there's also issues of slavery. Elon Musk has wants 25% of the largest cobalt producer, 70%. The Chinese are after that. You're on a very tenuous precipice, and government shouldn't be pushing technologies by encouraging them or getting ahead of the marketplace. Let the market decide. So I recommend very strongly that you give a resounding no to recommending enhancing this EV vehicle parade that we're on. And I'd say that in the words of a very esteemed Democratic leader, Joe Biden, don't do it. Don't do it. Just, it'll find itself. Hydrogen is coming along, 2028. You don't know if that's going to supplant everything. Even there, don't get in front of the technology. You can see what's happening. You saw what happened this weekend. You can see Elon Musk losing his shirt. This is just a media thing that's happened to us. Just be conservative. That's all. You don't have to get out in front. That's my recommendation, a resounding no to recommending that they go forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak during this public comment opportunity? No? Seeing none, I would close the public comment opportunity and look for any further discussion or a motion. I think one of the things that I heard from both staff and from the comment we heard is that the plan itself, and Commissioner Curry asked the question, the plan doesn't say what specifically will be done. And so I think that does give we heard that from staff, the ability to be flexible and to react as the market changes, as technology changes, as facts and science, new information is learned and developed. So I think that we're adopting, which is really more of a framework than a specific plan, is what we're asked to adopt, in my opinion. Commissioner Cookton?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think one part of the plan that is a little more concrete is the electrification of the city's fleet. That's something I asked about a few weeks ago. That's one thing I'm not as crazy about. I mean, I generally am in favor of this plan. I think it makes a lot of sense and it's reasonable, all those things. But our city's fleet, I don't find fleets to be generally great candidates for electrification. You know, the way you get more range out of an electric vehicle is just to add more batteries. There's no magic potion. You add more batteries and you get more range. And the city, I believe, has already ordered 10 F-150 Lightnings or something that have an enormous range, like 300 miles or something. And that's just way more than the city needs from a range standpoint. And so what we've really done is just, because batteries are hard on the environment, that is truth. And so what we've really done is taken a lot of batteries and they're just going to sit there charged almost all the time. And so like electric vehicles definitely make sense in a lot of circumstances. I don't find fleets to be generally good candidates for those. If we just got cars driving around the city, they're 20, 30 miles a day, you could do that with a much smaller battery. And so maybe it's not our trucks, but our person or a passenger vehicles. You get a Nissan Leaf with a 40-mile range, and that's 8 times less battery you're putting into a vehicle than these gigantic F-150s. And so this isn't the place for it. There are other avenues to advocate for something like that. I just don't find our city fleet to be generally a great candidate for electrification, but it's not going to stop me from supporting this application.
Commissioner Curry?
Yeah, and I don't know, maybe I should have asked this as a question earlier, but previously when we discussed this, I think I brought up the topic of kind of a return on investment because the perception is that electric vehicles are expensive, and maybe that's the reality, I don't know. The commentary in return was, yes, the maintenance costs in the long term will pay for the cost of the electric vehicle. And I think that was going to be addressed. I just didn't see it in the plan. So I guess I would hope that the city would take a closer look at is there actually a return on investment in electrifying the fleet rather than it is just cheaper to maintain long term. So that's just kind of general commentary.
Thank you. If I could, Mr. Chair and Commissioner, that's a great point. I know that prior to the work on the plan beginning, that our fleet staff did go and do an analysis of their fleet. So that's kind of one of the reasons for this plan, is that there was some work that was being done piecemeal by different divisions. So that was one example of they met and kind of identified candidates for electrification when those vehicles came due. So I think one thing as part of this plan that we want to do is revisit that citywide and take a look at that plan and make sure that we're on the same track or on the right track on that point. And if we need to modify, to Commissioner Crookton's point, the type of vehicles that maybe we bring in if we're replacing internal combustion vehicles with electric vehicles, maybe take a finer lens to that and understand what kind of batteries we need. And is the F-150 Lightning the best route, or is there another vehicle that can provide that electric vehicle capacity but maybe not have as much battery and need that much battery? That's a good point. Thanks.
And Mr. Chair, it's not really my place to say this, but that's where the magic of the plug-in hybrid really comes in. You get a small battery that's maybe 30, 40 miles. That gets you 90% of what a fleet vehicle needs just driving around Bloomington. And if a few times a year a gas engine needs to kick on to get you that last 10 miles back to City Hall, makes a lot more sense than having this enormous F-150 Lightning battery that we never use.
That's a I'm venturing into opinion on this, is that's I think the beauty of anytime we're talking about things like this is the answer is rarely all or nothing. The answer is rarely this is the golden ticket, the magic bullet. The answer is often all of the above. And so, is an electric vehicle right for everybody? No. Is a combustion engine right in certain situations? Yes. Think about trains, right? Trains require a massive amount of energy, but they're very efficient. It's highly unlikely that unless you do overhead electric lines, you're not going to have battery operated trains. In our climate, you're not going to affordably probably electrify most homes 24/7. Because in the cold weather like we're having now, it just doesn't, the technology isn't there. So, but there's hybrid things like you're talking about. And so I think it's really a good reminder that to anyone who claims that the answer is all or nothing, one or the other, the reality is it's in this topic or any topic, it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, for me, it's about right-sizing the vehicle to the job. And one thing, I work at an establishment that's very concerned about the environment and is trying to do things. And one thing I encourage our leadership to do is to take chances. We have a lot of emerging technologies we don't know, and we can either be too conservative, and that's not the right answer either. And so let's take some chances. Some F-150 Lightnings, that's fine. That's a good chance to take. Let's try some other things. Let's try one with a really small battery and see if that works. And if we fail, that's okay. We fail quick and we move on. And so, let's not get stuck on one avenue. Let's try to right size, take some chances, and see where it takes us.
It may be that if enough organizations are signaling they're interested in something like this, the market may then provide vehicles that are the F-149 Lightning that goes 49 miles. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking about, kind of switching gears here, one thing I liked about this plan is really thinking about what locations or what do we find as acceptable for this electric vehicle charging. I know when we talked during the study session, we talked about having, curbside versus in the parks or having it on, city premise. And so I look at it as an amenity for our residents that do choose to have electric vehicles if it makes sense for them and their families. But I like that there's at least some structure around what do we want as a city to have that amenity for our residents, and then how that will be implemented will be further on down the road. So that's one thing that I think in general is a framework. It's not the actual implementation. So overall, I'll be supporting, and I agree. Everyone has different mobility needs. If I was a better human, I would bike to work every day, but it just doesn't happen. So someday I'll get there.
Commissioner Issa.
I personally drive an electric vehicle, and the kind sir who spoke, I forgot your name, but a lot of the things he did say, I know you mentioned in the beginning that it's factually based. I came to realize that actually almost everything he said is pretty true. And I guess my question is, from an environmental standpoint, if the city did a comprehensive comparison of whether electric vehicles are indeed more or better for the environment than traditional gas-burning vehicles.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Commissioner. That's a big question. We didn't go into the detail of overall. I can't tell you yes or no, but what I can tell you is that there are certain sustainability and environmental goals that the city has, specifically greenhouse gas emissions. So our Sustainability Commission or Sustainability Coordinator was part of our Technical Advisory Committee. So the plan does include information regarding greenhouse gases. So as with a lot of these kind of high-level plans, there's a lot of different areas that are pulling at this. So there's the desire to provide the infrastructure to have the charging, but there's also the desire to reduce greenhouse gases in the city. There's also a desire to make sure that they're equitably placed. So trying to find that area where you can address all those things. So there's definitely greenhouse gas emissions benefits to having electric vehicles, but to your point, there's also, you need to produce that electricity to charge them, and that comes from somewhere too. So, thinking about those, but in terms of this plan, we're looking at some of those items, but I can't give you an overall, yes, this is a net positive or negative for the environment. This is just something that we want to make sure that we have the ability to have the technology available to charge these vehicles as they come online and become, more popular and more prevalent, and that we have the ability to install chargers and have framework in place. Doesn't mean that we're going to go out tomorrow and start installing chargers all over the city, but does mean that we're hopefully going to have a framework to allow them, as the market demands, to be able to install more chargers and have a plan to do so.
Oh, definitely. Thank you for that clarification. And one of the other things that I was kind of wondering is, with lithium batteries or most electric vehicles during the winter, especially like the cold front or cold streak we had over the past week, the battery drains really quick, So I know there was recommendations to have vehicles that have less charging range. I think we should have it not less, especially in the winter. Have it at a good range if once the plan is implemented. Just my personal opinion, but also when the batteries are mined, they do also have a negative impact on their environment, and there's a bunch of, like the counselor was saying, a bunch of human rights issues that are going on with in Congo specifically and some other areas that these batteries are mined, or the cobalt, things like that's produced. So I think we should also be mindful of that, and we tend to forget that when we look at kind of just once comparing a gas vehicle versus a electric vehicle after production, when it's on the road. That's just my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Additional discussion, or Commissioner Curry?
Thank you, Chair. One last thought, just regarding planning going forward. The document did, I think, encourage development of charging at multifamily developments and commercial developments. And it kind of makes me think, just finally tonight, is who is going to pay for this? And is this something that the city could possibly be overreaching at some point if they required this to happen on private property, especially in light of Commissioner Cookton's property owner rights comments tonight?
Yeah, I know in my time on the commission, we had a conversation about that at one point, Commissioner Goldsmith's time, about whether or not that a certain level of either readiness or provision of that kind of infrastructure should be a standard in our code. And at that time, the commission felt that no, that was not the right thing to do. And so in order to do something like that, you'd have to really come back either you'd have to change the code, or it could become an incentive in our list of things that we do to incentivize opportunity housing. Commissioner Cookton.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and to that point, I think Commissioner Curry, on some of our most recent applications, we're seeing applicants put those chargers in on their own accord. It's an attractive thing to their residents, and so I think the market itself is kind of handling that, where chargers are going in. I'm curious if the one tonight had one. We didn't talk about that, but some of the other developments in BCS have put chargers in just because they think it's a good benefit to their residents.
Commissioner Cookton.
Mr. Chair, thanks. Mr. Hanson, for the benefit of the public, can you talk about charging design and what we might see, or what this document may lead us to for some sort of design standards for these charging stations?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, Commissioner. I think the first question that we need to answer as a city, and the feedback that I've received from yourselves, the Sustainability Commission, as well as the council, is really identify where in the public realm that we see these chargers being installed as a city. I've gotten feedback just from our discussions in the study sessions. The general feedback I've received is lukewarm on curbside charging. Again, I don't want to characterize that. That would be coming back before you as a formal item that we would discuss in more detail. But the impression I've been getting is that there's more of a desire to maybe have these sited off the curbside. So maybe again in public parks or in city facilities where we have those. And then maybe it's just that we have the framework in place to allow the private market to decide if they want to install them, or maybe as a city we go out and seek someone that will install these chargers. So I think those items are what we really want to get into, and I'm excited to start to get to work on that. I think the first kind of big question that I'm thinking of proposing, and I want to talk about with the implementation group, is where in the public realm, the public right of way, do we as a city want to have these, and what do we need to do to facilitate that? Whether that be, like I said, seeking someone that will install them for us, or making it available and identifying locations where we would like to have someone install them. Those would be the first questions I think we'll need to answer.
Mr. Chair, thanks. Does this plan recommend any aesthetic design standards for new charging blocks?
And the associated infrastructure, I think, is really probably the bigger question. I think there's one that I know we've had conversation about, I don't know, online or offline, about the chargers themselves are one thing, especially on the level 3, and then there's the massive transformers that are just kind of plopped there that are a bit of an eyesore.
Yep. And thank you, Chair, Commissioner. I think that's one of the main, when you were talking about that matrix, I'm envisioning that matrix, that's one of the big things that we're going to probably have to tackle at the forefront, is what does that design look like? Because if we're going to be seeking out or making available the opportunity to install these chargers in public spaces, I think we want to know as a city what we want those to look like and how we want those to be installed. So that's definitely a question that with that implementation group, that's something that we can hit the ground running on and start to work on and have that standard available, so that when we seek, or if we do seek out installers, they have that information up front.
Yeah, I would say this commissioner is very supportive of design standards, so we have a couple of examples, or at least one that is awful.
Well, I would take that a step further. I hear what you're talking about, Mr. Hanson, but I think to the point of, this talks about a number of the city things, but I think to the point of the market responding and the private market doing some of this already, we don't have the standards when the private market comes in and does it. And that's, I think, likely to happen way sooner than public investment. Anyways.
Yeah. Chair Roman, Commissioners, one thing to clarify on the code standards relative to charging at multifamily sites. We do have a code standard that requires one charger per 50 units, a level 2 charger. However, the state has a provision that says that cities cannot be more restrictive than the state on building code issues. So if it's within a parking ramp, they say that infringes on that standard. So we can apply that standard on surface spaces, but not within a structured parking facility.
There we go. Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a tiny bit of feedback on the color coding.
Yes.
It's specific. But what I'm seeing is in your timeline, like on page 18, you have near, medium, and long, and I believe that short and midterm are maybe switched on what I have in terms of the color coding. I just want to make sure that that's... I was just curious about what the timelines were and how long you were considering near, medium, and long term, and it looks like the color coding is off on those.
Oh, you are, thank you very much. Yes, you are correct. I'm just looking at that right now. The code down below, that does not match what's on there. So thank you for
I think it's
on,
every code.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Now that I just see that there. So thank you. We will make that change before the council meeting. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
I mean, I can't support this thing.
That is a great catch.
Other discussion or a motion? Commissioner Goldsman.
Thank you, Chair. I can't elaborate more on what was said, but one thing I had a question about is you had said in 5 years to reevaluate. And is that soon enough? How did you land on 5 years?
Yeah, good question. Chair, Commissioner, there wasn't a real, I'm not going to say there was a real scientific method to that. It just seemed like a good time. So the implementation group will meet consistently throughout those 5 years. So it won't be like 5 years we're not looking at anything. If something were major were to change between now and then, we would obviously pivot. Or if this technology goes by the wayside, something else comes to the forefront, we're not going to continue to work on this. But the idea was just to have something in there, so if we were still working on it, that we had a touch point to actually go back and do a comprehensive review of the plan and bring that back before the bodies and understand, is this still a relevant plan? Do we want to continue to move forward with implementation? Do we want to revise it? So that's kind of how that came to. But that being said, if something happens in 3 years and there's some amazing breakthrough and, and we need to be on that track and this is no longer a relevant technology, then we can adjust as needed, so.
That's great feedback, and if I may, I think the city's done a nice job of coming back to us with revisions and recommendations. I think the next thing on our agenda is just that. So I would just reiterate that as we see changes in technology in the market, to come back to this group and ask for feedback.
Absolutely. And you will be seeing me, I'm sure, quite a bit as we start to implement the action items from this. These are going to take, these are going to be processes where we'll be back before you for looking for, motions and those type of things. So this won't be the last time you see from me or hear about this. So similar to the Lyndale Avenue retrofit project, as the, code changes are made, those items will come before you. So you'll be seeing items related to this, moving forward.
All right.
Change is certain in this area, or whatever. I mean, again, the example I talked about earlier on was, 12 months ago, electric vehicles, if you went to purchase one, you might get one of 3 types of plugs. 18 months from now, there will be one. So, again, decisions that are made can change, and so staff being on top of that and moving with that, I'm sure they're on that, but that's a good example of something that seems relatively benign, but that's a big impact.
Huge.
So, any other discussion? If not, Commissioner Goldsman?
If I may make a motion?
Please.
I move to recommend that the City Council accept the electric vehicle infrastructure plan.
Second.
Motion and a second to recommend acceptance of the infrastructure plan. Any further discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This will be on the January 29th City Council meeting as a public comment opportunity there as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Item number 3 is a study item. This is some initial discussion on potential rezonings on Lyndale Avenue. This is an ongoing conversation about the Lyndale Avenue retrofit, and as it continues to percolate, and again, as it will over time, Planner Ramler Olson is here with a presentation.
Is it just expected that when I come up here and speak about the retrofit plan, you must be so sick of it?
We all have expertise.
Terrific. All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Chair, Commissioners. Oh, I already jumped ahead. Let's not do that. Yeah, so the proposal before you is exploration of rezoning a contiguous group of parcels northeast of the intersection of Lyndale and 94th Street. It's about 11 parcels in total. I'll show a map of what that looks like in just a moment. And then we'd also appreciate some guidance on some parcels that are southwest of that intersection. Those are currently zoned B2 and they're guided general business. That makes them eligible for, and since they're along Lyndale, that we just want some guidance on whether we should consider those for rezoning as well, if they would follow in pursuit or in suit with other parcels that have contributed to the retrofit plan. And this is a map of what those parcels look like. That northwest or northeast, of that intersection, we've kind of split it up into 2 groups. There's the Lupian site. Those are the owners of that of those collection of 6 parcels, and then just south of that is the site where David Fong's restaurant is, and yeah, as I said, there's southwest of that are some a group of 7 parcels that might also be eligible, but yeah, we'd appreciate your feedback. What makes the what brings this item forward was, as was hinted before, is the suburban retrofit plan that was approved back in 2021. And we recognize that it focused on certain nodes along the stretch of Lyndale. So that one of the nodes being at 86th and 98th. If you recall, back in September of last year, City Council approved some rezonings. You also saw those on August 17th of actually that year. Those rezonings were approved, and from rezoning from B2 to B4 in line with the recommendations in the retrofit plan. What the retrofit plan was unable to foresee, or it just hadn't realized at the time of its adoption, was that there was a new node that was developing at 94th Street. There's the Real Life Co-op that's highlighted within the polygon letter A. That's 96 units that was added back in 2003. In 2021, we had Lyndale Flats that came online. That was 81 units. Still under construction, but it promises to bring 125 units to the city, is Oxborough Heights. So again, they're all coalescing around an intersection that seems like a good candidate for supporting with additional housing opportunities. These are maps illustrating what the guided land use of the properties in question, what they're guided for in the comprehensive plan, and then the surrounding land uses as well. On the right is the zoning. Obviously, they're B2, but there's a variety of zoning districts around them that ought to be considered when deliberating. As shown in this on the left image and the guided land use map, the two land uses are general business and community commercial. Those are some just descriptions to get you familiar with those two land uses. And you're probably familiar with B2, and that it distinguishes itself from B4 by allowing more auto-oriented uses, which is something that the retrofit plan wanted to reduce the presence of on Lyndale Avenue. I should say that it's been recounted to me. I mean, I wasn't there when the suburban retrofit plan was being written, but there were discussions that conveyed that there was some comfort of having some B2 properties along Lyndale. It wasn't recommending rezoning all properties to B4. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're deliberating about whether these are good candidates for rezoning. But nonetheless, yeah, B4 is also distinct from B2 by just offering more neighborhood scale development, something that appeals more to the pedestrian and creates a more pedestrian friendly environment, more attractive landscape, ensure access by foot and bike. So again, encouraging multimodal use. And this is a table that summarizes the distinction between B2 and B4 zoning. I can go through these standards if you prefer, but yeah, that's a good summary right there. Something that's always at the top of mind when you're considering rezonings is use or just nonconformity. Are you creating nonconformities by rezoning? That is certainly a concern. But so in this, as far as the analysis that went into this part of this research, we looked specifically at use. It's kind of hard to delve into some of the site characteristics and if they would comply with the new zoning. We imagine, I mean, there are definitely lots that don't comply with the minimum lot area that would find with B4. But that map that I showed earlier, there's definitely potential for site assembly so that you could actually facilitate a larger development that would be in line with the retrofit plan. So use conformity seems to be the more operative concern. And in that instance, there are a few nonconformities that would be created if rezoning to B4. There's presently a auto dealership along Lyndale in the Lupient, that area defined as Lupient. And then there's also an auto repair place in the group of parcels just southwest of the intersection. So some nonconformities would be created. However, as has been mentioned before, when considering rezonings along Lyndale, is that those conformities can continue indefinitely until something triggers this site needing to be brought into conformance with the underlying zoning district. So that's something to keep in mind. As far as engagement, staff reached out to the Lupient representatives as well as David Fong's, and we had a conversation, explained the project, or explained the proposal, and answered any questions that they may have had, and to get their take on what staff was pursuing. If we get direction to consider those parcels southwest of the intersection, we'll do the same sort of engagement activity. It won't be very widespread, but it will focus on those parcels under consideration. Next steps after this are to bring this study item to council in February, and also a resolution to initiate that rezoning, and then over March and April hold public hearings to consider the rezonings. And with that, I can take any questions you may have.
Thanks. You mentioned that you had reached out to property owners. Is there a general sense of what you heard? To the extent that you can share?
To the extent I can share. Glenn, do you think I can share? I don't want to divulge anything, but yeah, it was a good back and forth. The Lupien owners have had concepts before the city, and we've discussed that with them. Those haven't advanced, but nonetheless, they're still open to what working with the city in order to find an appropriate development that would fit on the site, work with the zoning, and also the goals of the retrofit plan. And and the Fong's representative also seemed very receptive to the city's proposal. They seemed fine with it.
Thank you. Commissioner Issa.
Thank you, Chair. What are some of the things that may trigger the non-conformity? And I know you said like a couple auto shops in that area. Like if you have any examples that could trigger or would trigger that.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. So if redevelopment, for instance, if they wanted to redevelop, they would have to bring the structure and the use into conformance with the underlying zoning district. So they could operate as they presently are, but as soon as they come forward to the city with an idea to redevelop the property, then they would need to bring their property in compliance. There's other, they would be prohibited from expansion, expanding the non-conforming use. So if they were able to basically recreate the site conditions and continue they would be able to continue the use as is, but redevelopment in terms of expanding the use, expanding the non-conformity, they wouldn't be allowed to do that. They'd have to bring that back, or they'd have to bring it into compliance with the zoning district.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ramler Olson, you mentioned some potential hesitation to remove too much B2. Why is that?
I would have to, Chair, Commissioner, I would have to defer to Planning Manager Mark McGough with regards to that. I wasn't there for those conversations, so I'm getting those secondhand.
Chair Roman, Commissioner Cookton, could you repeat the question?
He mentioned, Mr. Ramler also mentioned a hesitation, potential hesitation to get rid of too much B2 zoning. What's the hesitation?
Yes. So there was discussion throughout the Lyndale retrofit plan about B2, how much should remain, recognizing that there are, a mix of land uses today on Lyndale, and that there are community needs for auto-oriented uses, at least in certain parts of the city. The big ones being service stations, auto repair, gas stations, car washes. So there was discussion about, it shouldn't all be B4. So the Lyndale retrofit plan recommended certain nodes be rezoned, and those have now been completed. What we've been presented with is, frankly, a new node developing organically through these multiple phases of development, which raises the question, even though we don't have plan guidance for additional B4, would additional B4 be appropriate on those sites?
Thank you. Mr. Ramler Olson. So if we were speaking now to the southwest parcels that are under potential consideration, if those were to, in the end, go to B4, is there still some B2 remaining elsewhere on Lyndale? Or is that the potential to totally wipe out B2?
Chair, Commissioner, B2 would still be present on certain parcels along Lyndale, I believe even northwest of it. I'm just kind of operating by memory. But yeah, it would still exist.
Very well. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Goldsmith.
Thank you, Chair. Can we see the aerial map? I'm such a visual person, just to see here. And one question, well, thank you. One question I had for, maybe just to clarify this, the discussions when the Lyndale retrofit plan was, is in a lot of the areas that had the B2, there were single-family homes that were that abutted to those properties, and I think that was a concern to make them B4 and have that somewhat infringe in those single-family neighborhoods. And that's just off of my memory from when we had this discussion. In general, these, with maybe a few exceptions for the northern section, these are all abutting to industrial use or, other types of uses that are not single-family. And so I'm not concerned. I was actually in support of rezoning the 94th Street more so than the 86th Street, because I saw that this was ripe for development when we were doing the retrofit plan, and I was somewhat disappointed that it wasn't included in the original. So I'm in this neighborhood quite often, and I'm excited to see development here organically, but also I love that we now are taking steps to make sure that it's what we want and what we've envisioned it to be. So for the northeast section, I'll be supporting the B4. For the southwest corner, one of the concerns that I have, and I think rezoning makes perfect sense, but one of the concerns that I have there is there are some small businesses, small local businesses that provide a lot of value to our residents. Drooling Moose, for example, is one of the properties there. So I just want to be mindful of when we do contact these business owners, that we're mindful of their small businesses and that we can find a way to support them. The last thing that I want to say about the southwest corner is, so this area, thinking about residents and opportunities for those residents, abuts to is very close to the Veep, which provides a lot of value to residents and people in our county. And so I want to make sure that when we do zone this, that we think about, obviously further down when development happens, is that we have good amenities, good walkability, things for the residents to get from, property C to the places they need to be within, Veep or transit or whatever develops in the north section of property A. So I think this is great, and I'll stop at that.
I'm going to build on what you talked about. I think the ultimate vision of the retrofit was the full length, right, from American Boulevard all the way down. I don't know if it went all. I don't think it ever went all the way to 106th or beyond there. But the whole eventually was that the entire corridor would be transformed over time, and so I understand why we have the two nodes. The gap in between always felt a little bit odd to me. So if we're starting to fill in the gap, that makes sense. As we examine, and again, I know that these changes will happen over time. And I know there's the tension of not rezoning too soon and stifling. You don't want to have development that can't occur and have vacancy for a while. And so that's always a push-pull. And the other one I think about, and again, it's, we're not necessarily looking to make these recommendations or conversation additions based on any individual current use of a property. But I think there is something to be considered about some of the places as we're rezoning them or as we're thinking about how they change. There are certain areas that you do proactively because they are ripe for redevelopment. There are some areas that you proactively do because there may be opportunities that are coming. But then I think we also talk a lot about underserved parts of our communities and how we make sure that our community is something that people who work here can afford to live here and whatnot. And the reason I say that is because there are some things like, I know there's an auto service place there that's probably a more affordable auto service place than perhaps a few blocks down, one that's associated with a major car manufacturer. So again, I just think about as we do those things, what are some of the things we might be doing that may have an impact on other members of our community beyond just this 2-block area. Generally speaking, I think it's the right thing to do. I think exploring the conversation to the southwest is the right thing to do, especially since in both cases there's only one identified potential nonconformity created. I think we created more nonconformities than that in the 86th Street node. So I think it's worth the conversation, and be curious to see what you learn. Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, Chair. I think those are these have all been great thoughts so far. Generally, I think if the market is supporting something and we seem to have traction with it, I think we should support it or continue to encourage it. I don't know. You just said, if we shouldn't be rezoning or taking into consideration one specific use or one specific parcel as part of the consideration, but I would say at a higher level, does the transitional industrial use, is that supportive as a transition from B2 into, like, can those types of uses generally move from B2 into the transitional industrial? Is that a place for B2 businesses to go? Or do they have to go across 35W and somewhere else?
Thoughts?
Chair, Commissioner, I would have to recall the uses that that are common between B2 and the Transitional Industrial District. That was a district that was just created last year, so you'd think it'd be top of mind, but it's not. Nonetheless, there are the auto-oriented uses that you would find in B2, which, that's the main distinction between that and B4. But those do work in transitional industrial. So there is a way for uses to migrate from those areas that were B2 to transitional industrial. I suppose if that is the evolution of Lyndale, then yeah, I think that would accommodate those sort of transitions.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Cookton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Commissioner Curry, I think it's also important to remember they don't have to move. So if we were to rezone them, they can stay legally non-conforming as long as they so choose. And so that's not to overlook that we are putting somebody as a legal non-conformance. We take that seriously, and that's why I want to make sure, as you've proposed, that we reach out to those applicants and we get their feedback, because it is important and we don't take that lightly. Looking at the southwest parcels, they don't look like they've been touched for a long time. And so my sense is that they're maybe just as happy as they are, or if they're going to do something, they'd probably just wipe it and put a big old apartment building there. And so I'd like the city to hear from them, which I suspect they will. But it's not something where I have a ton of concern where there's a lot of changing activity there, that they're all pretty old and they're not, not, my sense is they're either going to stay put or they'll sell off and we'll see new development there. So with the northeast parcels, I'm in favor of it. I think that's terrific. I look at what was done in Parcel C, and that might be my favorite development in the entire city since I've been on the Planning Commission. It's just perfect. It's the right project in the right place in a parcel that's not all that desirable, honestly. Like, it's not on the main street. You got to kind of walk back there. It's next to a fast food place, but we're getting like this awesome, dense development that's needed, and I'm just super proud of that development at Parcel C. And I think that's just exactly what we envision on Lyndale. Just totally like a 180 from our first application tonight. Like, this is the right project in the right place. And I'm just super happy with that. And it gives me so much hope for where Lyndale is going. And I think everything we've done with Lyndale is just right on the money. And I'm hoping we can see more of that in these parcels we're talking about tonight. I mean, 3 of those parcels, the 3 directly south of Lot C, are vacant. I mean, that just seems so ripe for another, whether it's senior housing or whatever. I mean, it's just right there. Let's go. I think it's awesome. And we've got a lot of underutilization in this area that I think is just going to be terrific for development. And so I'm in favor of the northeast parcels. The southwest parcels, I think, are also good candidates. I think we should proceed with that. Let's talk to those landowners. If there's a big problem, let's see what we can do about it. But I'd like to continue forward with investigation of those southwest parcels as well.
I think it's fascinating too, building on what you were just saying, is we're talking about B4 here, but at least in the northeast section, that could all end up being RM50, which is, again, the applicants would bring that to us, but I think we're talking about B4 because we're trying to make it less of what B2 is, but it may end up being something completely different that is complementary, but not what we're talking about right now. So, Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair. My only feedback on this is for staff to be cautious about the pushback from current property owners. I believe that we dulled down B4 by allowing pawn shop uses, and I think that we should try and maintain the spirit of the Lyndale retrofit plan. And I know that was directed by City Council, but I was in disagreement with that. And I think just creating a precedent there that we aren't dulling down the spirit of B4, and we're basically back to B2. And so then what's the difference in my opinion in going through the whole process of rezoning? Because I do believe in a mix of uses, and so if those uses want to be somewhere along this corridor, then maybe it needs to be B2, and maybe we need to reserve some parcels for that. So I think there needs to be an additional conversation about where we want these uses. That's all I have to say about that.
Any other comments, or have you gotten what you need from us?
Chair, yes, I believe so.
All right, and so I think as we saw in the plan there is that staff will be having a similar study session with the council in February and likely back here in March or April.
Thank you.
Good work. All right, item number 4 is another study item and discussion of potential amendments to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, and with special guest Housing Development Specialist Niemeyer.
Good evening. Thanks for the warm welcome, Chair, Commissioners. Let's see. Great. So tonight, happy to bring a study session for the Opportunity Housing Ordinance And I'll just go over quickly. This item went before the Port Authority Commission on Tuesday of this week, and will also be going to the HRA next Tuesday. And each one of those sessions is a study session looking to get guidance and consideration from the commissions and boards on that set of proposed amendments that you saw in the staff report, and then also ask some specific questions on some of these modifications to existing language. So just to go through what I'll present on tonight, we thought it would be helpful to provide some background on the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, talk about its history and purpose, how it functions, what the related objectives in terms of citywide objectives and regional objectives are with the OHO, and then talk about some upcoming work that the OHO has. And then we'll get into the proposed amendments. And I'll also explain what the timeline is, the intention of these amendments, and then ask some specific considerations to the board. And then we'll conclude with additional feedback if there is any items that came up in your review of the staff report that you'd want to go over in this study session. So the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, it's designed to encourage on-site production of affordable housing units and preserve existing affordable units while not creating undue restraints to financial feasibility of new market rate housing developments in the city of Bloomington. This was an effort that started back in 2019 with the Housing Nexus study that the city paid for, and it informed the incentives that are now part of the OHO today. It's also it was adopted in 2019, instructed by that Housing Nexus study, and went into full effect in that same year, later in September, after a 6-month review and implementation period. And this is really considered a living document. So it's been amended in 2019, 2021, and 2022, sometimes more than once in those years. And it comes before the city council annually at minimum. It also has come before the commissions as review sessions, study sessions, but it primarily goes to city council each year around September. So as part of the OHO, the intention is to have a continuous process of feedback, assessing the outcomes, how developers are interacting with the OHO, and you can see that reflected in its purposes. So the primary purpose is to ensure that affordable housing is developed in the city of Bloomington, and that we're promoting flexibility in how those developments come to be, and that we're being adaptable to the changing economic circumstances, market conditions, and real estate conditions in the city and region. The purpose of the OHO is to implement city goals, city council and city's goals around affordable housing, its policies and objectives around affordable housing. It's specifically meant to allow for a bundling of incentives for a single development to provide housing units affordable at those extremely low and very low income levels, which we'll talk about more, so that populations in need of affordable housing have somewhere to live in the city of Bloomington. And then, as I'll mention a couple times, the intention is to allow for continuous review and revision of the OHO. It's a living document so that it can continue to be relevant going forward. And there we go. Okay, so I just wanted to give a quick brief on how the OHO functions and how it interacts with developments. So as a result of the Housing Nexus study and following financial feasibility studies that the city conducted, it was determined that for a development of 100 market rate units, there would be a resulting demand of 9 affordable units at the 60% area median income level. So the way that that's manifested in our ordinance is a 9% requirement for housing developments. The OHO establishes incentives to encourage developers to provide not only that 9% level at 60% AMI, but to go beyond, to provide additional dwelling units at affordable levels, and to provide units at a deeper affordability level, the 50% AMI or the 30% AMI levels. There are different ways for developers to provide their, to fulfill their requirement, the opportunity housing requirement. Those are listed on the screen. On-site is obvious. Off-site is an option for developers to actually construct those required units, the 9% off-site. There's also the opportunity to pay a fee in lieu of developing affordable units, and that is set and can be reviewed and adjusted by City Council, but that is set so that it's a fee based on the square footage of the total dwelling units, the dwelling unit square footage of the development. So a developer can pay a fee in lieu. That would be put into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for affordable housing activities. Additionally, developers may choose to assign their payment of fee in lieu to a proposed development that includes the required affordable units. And that would be, if they were to provide that affordable development, it would be 20% of total dwelling units at an affordable level, at that 60% AMI affordable level. Developers can also dedicate land with a value commensurate with what would be required in the payment in lieu situation. Developers can also purchase and rehab existing units, so that would be naturally occurring affordable housing. They may acquire those units and provide them at an affordable level. Again, in that case, it would be 20% of units at the 60% AMI level. So just to show what those rent and income limits are this year, I'll highlight the column, the 68% AMI column. That's that baseline level of affordability that our developments are required to provide 9% of their total dwelling units at. You can see in the bottom table that amount increases year over year, and that's due to the rent and income limits being set by HUD. So HUD creates their fair market rate for each year, and with those numbers, they set the affordability levels. So for Bloomington, we're lumped together with Minneapolis and St. Paul for our metro statistical area. And so these AMI levels apply to the entire metro. So the Metropolitan Council takes HUD's numbers and establishes what a affordable rent would be. So affordable in this case would be that 30% of the tenants, no more than 30% of the tenants' income would go to their housing costs. So to talk more about incentives, there's largely two main groups of incentives that developers have access to. Those are financial-based incentives, which we've discussed a little bit about, but I would also highlight the opportunity for land write-downs. If we're in a situation where the city is owning the land that the developer is looking at, we can look to write the cost of the land down if affordable units are provided. There would also be the Affordable Housing Trust Fund availability, and then tax increment financing. Those are some of the financial-based incentives that a lot of the developments have been taking advantage of since implementation of the OHO. And then the other main group is development standard flexibilities. So those would be things like parking stall reductions that we discussed tonight, storage space reductions, impervious surface reductions. I'm pulling those out because we'll talk more about those later on. So these are some of the incentives. And then I'm going to pass it over to Planning Manager Glenn Markegard to talk about how the Planning Commission's role interacts with the OHO.
Chair Roman, Commissioners, the OHO, or Opportunity Housing Ordinance, really touches on a lot of bodies, Port Authority, Housing and Redevelopment Authority, City Council, Planning Commission, and others. So I just wanted to highlight the Planning Commission's role relative to those other bodies. Certainly what's within your role relative to the OHO is reviewing development applications. We had one tonight. As part of that, your role is to ensure that those proposed affordable housing plans comply with the OHO standards, and then review any incentive requests that are proposed through the OHO process, really for appropriateness. The code section says the incentives are not mandated. They're not, they don't have to be given away. And the test really is if one incentive would have a negative impact on the surrounding area, that incentive does not need to be approved. So that's kind of the level of review. Are there any negative impacts on the surrounding area with the incentives? And then finally, as you are tonight, you would review OHO ordinance amendments periodically. A couple things that are outside your role are financial assistance, determining the level of assistance or the type of assistance. That's something that the Port Authority or HRA would address. An exception on financial assistance comes with TIF, and state law says the Planning Commission is responsible for determining whether a TIF request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So you've seen several of those items come before you, but there your focus is very limited. Is it consistent with the comp plan? Another area outside your role is compliance, which is port focused, and then enforcement, which the legal department and Port Authority would work on as well. And then the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, decisions related to that are the domain of the Housing and Redevelopment Authority. So just wanted to highlight Planning Commission's role relative to those other bodies.
Thank you. So I mentioned before the OHO interacts with City Council and city goals, and I'd specifically draw out Bloomington Tomorrow Together, BTT, as one of those city initiatives that the OHO is delivering on. So that's, of course, a connected, welcoming community, a healthy community, and a community with equitable economic growth. And I would say creating opportunities for people to be welcomed into the city and feel valued in their home allows for a connection with neighbors. Improving human health, safety, and security by providing stable housing for people is creating a healthy community, and contributing to equitable job growth by providing workforce housing in Bloomington is creating a community with equitable economic growth. We also see the OHO interacting with our Met Council need allocation. So the Metropolitan Council forecasts future affordable housing needs using a regional economic model, and then allocates a share of the overall need to communities in the metro. So you can see in this table here on the bottom row is Bloomington's share of affordable housing need for the period of 2021 to 2030. So the OHO has been delivering on this goal already. I've called out on the right side of the screen that we've already achieved our goal for units affordable at the 60% AMI to the 80% AMI level for new units. We far exceeded that goal. We're making good progress on 50% AMI units, and that goal would be reached and exceeded if currently approved developments were to be constructed and opened. But there's much more work to be done in terms of 30% AMI, and that's that lowest level of affordability, most difficult to reach for developers, and oftentimes requires subsidy from local sources, state sources, and federal sources. So what you'll see tonight is a lot of the proposed amendments are trying to create incentives for developers to create those 30% AMI units so that we can see those working toward our Met Council need goals. I'll also mention that the HRA conducted a housing needs analysis in 2018 and determined that there would be a need for 745 units affordable between 51% and 80% AMI, and 319 units affordable at 50% AMI or less by 2030. So that's a total of 1,064 units. So even a higher need than what Met Council has allocated to us. So this is how the OHO is helping the city and the region achieve its affordable housing goals. And so before we get into the proposed amendments, I just wanted to touch briefly on what upcoming work there is in regards to the OHO. So the main work that I'm doing in my role as housing development specialist is implementing the compliance program, and that will be for the units that have been developed since the adoption of the OHO. So there's quite a few units out there already. We want to ensure that those units are in compliance with the development agreements that they entered into, the regulatory agreements that they entered into, and also ensure that the tenants that are living in those units are essentially they're getting what they were promised through the OHO. We'll also be working on updating the Housing Nexus study. So as mentioned, that was done in 2018, and it was essentially for a 5-year period. That Nexus study is how we established the 9% requirement and how we established the rate for the payment of fee in lieu, so that it's a good time to update that Housing Nexus study. And we'll continue to gather feedback from community stakeholders and assess OHO outcomes. So this, of course, these proposed amendments are part of that continual feedback and amendment process. So Getting into the proposed amendments, we're in the middle of the study sessions. I mentioned next Tuesday is the HRA study session. And then once we get all of that feedback from the three commissions or the two commissions and the board, we will incorporate those into the proposed amendments and bring them back before each body in February. And then pending a recommendation of approval, a recommendation to City Council for approval, the proposed amendments would go before the City Council in mid-March. So the housing ordinance proposed amendments they fall under different types, and you'll have seen that they're broken out in the staff report. There are modifications to existing language, and those are the main proposed amendments that I'll be asking specific considerations on tonight. And there's also new language and minor updates and clarifications. Minor updates and clarifications they're not expected to impact implementation of the OHO. The main purpose is clarity as well as alignment with ordinance across the city. So the goal of the amendments largely is to, as stated before, respond to changing economic circumstances, local housing needs, and real estate market conditions. The goal is to create more incentives or bolster the incentives for development of units affordable at that 30% AMI level, and to ensure that there's a clear and transparent process for developers to interact with the Opportunity Housing Ordinance throughout the development process. So there's five specific five specific modifications to existing language that I will be covering tonight. And seeing that this item went to the Port Authority on Tuesday, some of these items will include feedback from that presentation. So I will jump right in to the first item, which is a modification to the existing language of section 9.09, which is the payment in lieu of affordable units option for compliance. So as currently constructed, this allows for developers to assign, as mentioned before, assign their in lieu payment for affordable unit development to an offsite development, an additional development that would include 20% of total dwelling units at that 60% AMI level. The proposed change is that instead of a 20% of the total dwelling units of the proposed development, that there would instead be a requirement to provide that number, which is 9% of the total dwelling units of the original development, in addition to 11% of the units in the proposed development. This proposed change is to ensure that if the proposed development has far fewer units than the original development, that the city is not losing out on getting its full allocation of affordable units that the OHO would have required in the proposed change scenario. So the intent is to provide additional clarity for OHO interaction in the development process. The consideration that we're asking the Planning Commission is more philosophical and wider ranging than the specific proposed amendment, but the consideration is, does allowing for this offsite development of affordable units allow for a geographic segregation of market rate units from affordable units? Is the OHO's objective of dispersion achieved? The OHO has objectives for integration of affordable units and market rate units within buildings. It also has the objective of dispersion of affordable units geographically across the city. So I would welcome any thoughts on that.
It's a study item, so we'll take these as they come. Thoughts on that? We don't have a limit, do we, on how many? I mean, so if I develop 6 buildings and I choose to redistribute all 6 of those into a building, then that becomes 70%. We do allow that.
Chairwoman, Commissioners, I understand if that scenario were to take place, that would be allowable. I think Jason Schmidt might have more insight onto that question.
Good evening, Chair Roman, Commissioners. Jason Schmidt, Assistant Port Authority Administrator. So we would analyze the OHO with regards to that. So it specifically states that developments are able to pay the fee in lieu. and then designate that to the next building. There is a time frame as to how long that money can sit in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund before that development is required, the affordable development is required to start construction. And so there is a 2-year period starting on the day that that payment is made to the city. So within 2 years from that day, the developer is required to get preliminary development plans for their next affordable housing. And so if they were able to get that PDP, then follow the process, the 2-year process of how long that PDP is approved for, and they were then able to create another development to do a fee in lieu, it most likely could work, but there is a time crunch, and it would be very difficult. Most likely a 2 development could work, probably not a 7.
So the time factor there is, okay. Other feedback on this question? Okay.
Thank you, Chairwoman,
Crickets
Commissioners.
suggest you're on track.
Great. Moving on to the next item. This is section 9.16.04, which is the impervious surface reduction incentive. And as proposed on Tuesday to the Port Authority, this would have been essentially a retooling of this incentive. So this incentive hadn't seen use up until this point. It was a part of an amendment in 2021 to add additional incentives to the OHO. It hasn't seen use yet, and at the annual OHO report in 2023, there was a question on is this helping, or is this contributing or not contributing to the city's goals of environmental sustainability and environmental resilience. So in discussion internally with planning and environmental sustainability, there was an idea to retool this incentive to apply to commercial conversions to housing units. And this is also to respond to changing economic circumstances. We've heard a lot about the vacancies in commercial and office buildings and the desire to repurpose those into housing dwelling units. One point that was brought up at the Port Authority Commission, by the Port Authority Commission, is that we may be getting ahead of ourselves in terms of the planning department's and planning commission's intention to study office conversions as part of the 2024 work plan. So the proposed change was originally to allow for conversion projects that provide 20% of their total dwelling units at 50% AMI to maintain their maximum, to maintain the maximum impervious surface coverage of the applicable commercial zoning district prior to conversion to residential. At this point, the consideration that I'm bringing to the Planning Commission is it best to hold this item, this amendment back for consideration alongside the office conversion policies? And this would be to ensure that we're not locking an office or commercial building into its existing state because they can only be assured a maintained impervious surface area if they provide these requirements.
Commissioner Goldson.
Thank you. So one of the things that when you're talking through this, I was thinking about is really the livability of these locations and green space and having, think of impervious surface, you're thinking of a parking lot. And I'm thinking, is that really an attractive place for someone to live and for children to play? And not to say that it couldn't be achieved in certain ways, like sport courts or things like that. But I really think that we should look at this holistically with the office conversion plan and not tie impervious surface with affordability, because I think green space is a right, not a privilege. That's just my 2 cents.
Commissioner Cookton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree with holding this back. I think conversion of commercial to residential is very complex. It is not as simple as, we got a building that doesn't have a tenant, let's put people in there. It's so much more complex than that. And I'm not sure how practical it is. I mean, a lot of people are talking about this, but I don't know if the market is really responding to this because of the design complexities from an architecture standpoint. Man, is it expensive to I'm probably speaking out of turn, but it's certainly complex because you don't have utilities where you want them and you don't have access where you want it. And it's not an easy thing. And I'm not ready to make any changes on that type of conversion stuff until we study it. I'm not sure how, I'm not even sure we should be pushing it in Bloomington. I think it's so complex. And so I'm not ready to, I think we should hold this back.
Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, Chair. My only question on this is if we're trying to promote a 30% AMI, is there a reason this was set at the goal, which we've already achieved early?
Chairwoman, Commissioner Curry, thank you for that question. As originally proposed, when I was asking for considerations on Tuesday, that was more of the question was, is this an appropriate affordability level? So I think if we were not talking about holding this back, I think that would be an excellent question to ask. Would this be a prime opportunity to create another incentive for for creation of those 30% AMI units? So I agree. I think that's a good question to ask, and we can keep that in mind if and when this moves alongside the office conversion work item.
Commissioner Goldsmith.
Thank you. One other question I have around that, just impervious surface and coverage, we still have the watershed district to contend with as well. So I guess the question that I would have for staff is, what is the applicability of this when we know that there are office buildings that have to comply with watershed district and impervious standards? So just another layer to tack on.
I think for me on the core question, should it come hand in glove with the other study? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. On to the next item, section 9.19, which is the parking reduction. So there's been some discussion on this tonight. So as currently constructed, the parking reduction incentives are highly favored by developers. They've been for developments that have an affordability component so that they were able to utilize this incentive. They've all utilized the incentive since 2021. The proposed change would be that if developments seek a parking reduction incentive above that 10% level, that the city engineer or their designee would have the discretionary option to require the developer to undertake a parking study. This is in reaction to some of the housing developments that have gone through that were able to secure a higher parking reduction incentive and have since some residents that have been renting from those units have had difficulty finding parking, or those buildings have seen residents parking on streets that aren't part of the designated parking for that development. So in discussion with Public Works, the recommendation is to allow for staff discretion to require a parking study. The consideration to the Planning Commission is if that proposed threshold for allowing the staff to require a parking study is appropriate, and following discussion and feedback with Port Authority, is this proposed change increasing or decreasing transparency of the development process? So as I mentioned, the intent is to provide clarity for how the OHO interacts with developers in the development process. But the point brought up by the Port Authority is that if developers see that this requirement can come in after they exceed that certain limit, then they might have increased uncertainty. They might not know if this will be an additional cost that they'll have to undertake.
Commissioner Curry?
Thank you, Chair. Generally speaking, I would say the cost of development just continues to go up, and I think the city has taken some active measures to try and reduce the cost of developing new housing. So my thinking is that you do not give the city the additional ability to require more studies and increase the cost of development for residential.
Commissioner Cookton?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Niemeyer, can you clarify, so the city's been receiving complaints about parking problems?
Thank you, Chair Roman, Commissioner Cookton. Yeah, so what I've been told is there is a development that got closer to the maximum amount of the parking reduction and is having difficulty like providing spaces for all residents, and that would include guests to the building. So I think in this case, this specific scenario is a difficulty with guests having enough places to park. They're parking on the street in an area where street parking isn't permitted.
Mr. Chair, would it be appropriate to ask which development that is?
Chair Roman, Commissioner Cookton, I think we can talk about that. It's the Cadence development on Old Cedar Avenue at 80th Street.
Help me locate 80th Street.
It's, in the shadow.
Just south of American.
Other side of the mall,
Yep.
west of the
Okay.
mall.
Or the park.
So is it just the one? Sorry, I don't mean to hammer that.
Chair and Commissioners, as far as I know, it's just the one that I've heard a specific discussion around.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm kind of running through my head how many residential developments we've had. Maybe it's 15 under the OHO, something like that. It's been a lot. And I'd be curious to look at that case specifically. I'm a little hesitant to make a broad change to what we're doing based off of one problem. Maybe we were too aggressive there. Did you look at that particular application, and can you provide a little bit more of like, we think this was the problem at this one? And I don't mean to hammer on this developer. I don't think it's anybody's fault. Just trying to get more information to understand how we can do better.
I might be able to provide some little more context to that. So the Cadence property that we're talking about, or Kenny was referring to, in that specific scenario, they were right at the threshold as far as their reduction in parking goes. So they were right at that number. They met the qualifications to qualify for that. The issue that came forward, as Kenny mentioned after the fact, was that there wasn't enough spots on site. The specific instance was there was a caregiver that was there for a resident, and they were having trouble finding places to park on site. The adjacent streets, 80th and Old Cedar Avenue, were signed no parking. Staff was able to provide some on-street parking in that particular location because there was availability as a residential neighborhood. We could open up some parking to accommodate that. Some of the concern that staff from engineering and public works had was, speaking of, for example, 700 American Boulevard, that area, there is no opportunity to provide on-street parking immediately adjacent to that site if there were an issue with the reduction provided by the OHO. So some of the concerns that were put forward by staff from engineering was, is there a way that we could remedy that to make sure that we don't cause an issue by approving this reduction in parking based on the OHO incentives if we know there's no way the city can provide assistance if there does become an issue in the future?
Thank you. So, Mr. Niemeyer, the proposal here, as you stated, it reads a little different than what's written on the slide here. So the slide suggests that developers that seek a parking reduction incentive above 10% may be required to undertake a parking study. So I guess the key word here is maybe. So to clarify, that's at the discretion of the city. It's not a requirement.
Chair, Commissioners, correct. That would be a discretion of the staff.
I have some mixed feelings, but I am supportive of this because we do have some neighborhoods where there's no on-street parking. That was one of my concerns when I was here. Well, when we were doing residential development at Normandale Lake Office Park, 0 on-street parking. And I was concerned about being really aggressive with the parking reduction in that neighborhood because especially with like senior housing, that's risky to not have that. And so I certainly understand Commissioner Curry's standpoint where I don't like adding additional layers of complexity and fees, especially when we're trying to create affordable housing. Making them undertake a parking study makes that more complicated. But if it's at our discretion, I think I could support this one. But I'm not 100% there.
I wonder though, the question that we're trying to get at is the right question. And I don't know, this is maybe a what we do or what we don't do as the city side of an application process. I know there's the development review committee that does a lot of this stuff. I don't know how hard it is for us as a city, the staff, to look at an application and say, well, we can clearly see that all 4 of these streets have no parking. Do you need a parking study to know that nothing within a 4-block radius has parking? Just for example. And so it's a little bit of both and. It's, yes, we need to do that. On the other hand, we know some of this stuff. Or I might need to really trigger that in this area, but if I'm building over here at 98th and Lyndale, that may not be an issue because it's well served by transit, for example. So it's maybe a little more nuanced. And so that may be where you get to the may part, but I think you would need more, I'd need some more ideas about what might trigger the may in order to be comfortable with the may. Commissioner Issa.
Thank you, Chair Roman. I definitely agree with Commissioner Curry, excuse me, and I would not want to see developers have, additional costs possibly or just face uncertainty. At the same time, to kind of second what you were saying, Commissioner Crookton, if it were, let's say, to be a senior development and there's not enough parking, or like, as you said, the 700 American Boulevard, how there's not street parking, right? That would be an issue. So if there's any way to look at it case by case and then decide, instead of having just overall, reduction incentive where we are to look at it case by case, or, city staff look at it case by case and then, decide if there should be a study done. Then it's kind of my thoughts.
Commissioner Albrecht.
Thank you, Chair. I think the answer to the second question there is, does this proposed change increase or decrease transparency? I think it decreases transparency given the terminology of may required. I think something more certain, even if it is required, probably is better for developers to have a certainty rather than uncertainty. I'm not suggesting that it says is required. I just think if the question is, does it decrease or increase transparency, it definitely decreases transparency.
Commissioner Goldson?
No, you're fine. I was just going to say that. I wrote down may versus shall in my notes because I was just thinking about that too. And I think it's not clear when they are going to be required or not. The other question I think I have is really just looking at, is the 10% the right number? I know all of the applicants in front of us have asked for a reduction in parking. And so I would ask staff to look to see what the average is, and is 10% the right number? I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it just seems that maybe at 10%, because we are overparked in 80-20 rule, that's probably too low in some cases. So that's my 2 cents.
The only other thing I have to add is if we do have any changes in parking reduction overall, particularly in multifamily, then 10% may be 10% of less parking is just less. So, I think this one probably needs to be pushed down the road a little bit in my perspective.
Because I think there's just a lot of layers there, and so if it does come back as if staff do bring it back as a recommendation in a month or two, whenever it comes back, I think it would be good to know what are the things that, okay, you could require it in these situations. How do you feel about these situations, or whatever that is? Because I think, again, the whole overparked, underparked, whatever. I'm not afraid of people parking on streets. I know that we have an aversion oftentimes in the suburbs to people parking on the streets. And we have these massively large streets that you can park plenty of cars. So I don't need the guest to be able to park 3 feet from the door. Do I feel differently about residents? Sure. But, in the case of what we heard about, clearly the street parking wasn't an option. But I don't think having guests park on the street is a problem. Commissioner Curry.
Thank you, Chair. We should probably just look at a map that says no parking anywhere around the development if we're short of parking on the development, right? That's it. Yeah, that's all I got.
It's a complex issue, Mr. Chair. It really is. How much transit you have, which I think you mentioned, the streets around it, the type of development. is it senior housing or not? How busy are the streets? I don't know. I'm not ready to quite make a decision on this one. And if we do see it come back, to your point, I think data is good. This commission does well when we see data, and this one seems like a data-driven decision to me. So if we could get some additional data here to help us make the decision next time around, that's what I would like.
Good.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners.
I'm realizing I know that we've moved on from it, but the previous one that we said we were going to delay the permeable surfaces, I think if it does come back in a year or whenever, I would hope that it's been to the Sustainability Commission, not just the Sustainability staff.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners.
I don't know why that popped back in my head.
No, it's good. Thank you. It's helpful. Yes. Okay. So thank you for that. The next item is section 9.23, which is the storage space reduction incentive. As currently in the OHO, this allows developers who meet the Opportunity Housing Ordinance requirement, which is 9% of total dwelling units at 60% AMI, to reduce the number of required storage spaces by 50%. This is storage space external to the dwelling unit. If 20% of total dwelling units are affordable at 50% AMI, then that requirement is reduced by 75%, or maybe. The proposed change would be, the intent is to incentivize 30% AMI units and make developments that include those units more financially feasible. It would be to allow a development that provides 20% of total dwelling units at 30% AMI to completely reduce that storage space requirement by 100%. The consideration is, does removing the requirement for storage space result in overcrowding of units or other storage issues? This consideration was brought to the Port Authority, and they shared this concern. The concern itself was brought to me by Environmental Health in discussion of this specific amendment. And so I bring that consideration to you as well.
Commissioner Goldsman?
Thank you, Chair. I just want clarification here. So if 20% of the units are at that 30%, they would not be required to have any storage space regardless of the level, correct?
Chair and Commissioner, correct. And that would be external storage. So this wouldn't impact requirements for whatever the building code is for within a unit.
Like a closet or something. Right. It's more like a cage in a garage space or something like that. Okay.
Do we have performance standards or requirements on what those storage space dimensions are? Or do they just have to have them?
Chair and Commission, I have that in front of me. So for developments that have no dedicated bicycle storage, the requirement is 175 cubic feet per unit. If they do have a dedicated bike storage, the requirement is 96 cubic feet per unit. That
okay? Which is not terribly big, but when you get into cubic feet, yes, yes.
I think we've seen some developments where the storage spaces have been an issue. I think this is great. I mean, I think encouraging folks to provide affordable units at 30%, given the layout of units that we've seen and the amount of closet space that some of these units have. I mean, way more closet space than I have in my house. And so I just think that I think this is a good incentive. I don't think that we would be seeing any overcrowding of units or storage issues. Plus, we have a lot of self-storage in the city of Bloomington too. So
but we don't want more.
But we don't want more. But we have lots of it. So
this was another one where I think we had one that came before us that wanted less storage,
yep.
And it may not have been even. I don't know if it was an OHO or if it was just a regular development, and it probably couldn't be gathered, or maybe it could be gathered, at least some level of data before this comes back again. But none of the developers seem to be able to tell us what their take rate was on storage,
yes.
Which I find shocking. You know, like, are you filling 20% of your storage units, or are you filling all of them? I mean, I have a feeling that, you know, if they could make money in filling all of it, it would just be if there was any way to have a gauge about, yeah, we require this, and only half of them are being filled anyways, this might be a moot point.
Or what the price is of it as well. I mean, for someone who's at 30% AMI, I would venture to guess. Right, I'd venture to guess that that is prohibitive, cost prohibitive. The one thing I would add is, and sorry, Commissioner Cookton, I know you're going to say something. I think bike storage should be included in here as well. If you're going to eliminate storage entirely, particularly if we are going to be a more bike-friendly community, that there would be a requirement that there would be on-site bike storage of some kind. I'm not saying you have to have state-of-the-art with showers and tools and all that jazz, but at least some place for people to have bikes that they're not in their units.
Mm-hmm.
Chair and Commissioners, I did want to provide one point of clarification, which is in our OHO, that the affordable units in a development are to be provided this external storage space included in their rent, and that amount can't exceed the rent limit that unit has. And that would be the same case if you were considering a parking stall reduction, is that those affordable units in that development would have access to the parking stall without extra cost or to exceed their rent limit.
Commissioner Cookton?
Okay, would like to support express my support for this one. When I was in college living at 0% AMI, I did not care if I was too crowded in my apartment. It was more important that it was cheap than if I had boxes sitting everywhere. And so if we're trying to serve a market here, that market is telling us for whatever reason in their life circumstances, they need affordable rent. And as one who used to be in that scenario, I didn't care about overcrowding. So as long as we're not overcrowding people or something crazy, I'm fine. I like this one.
Commissioner Curry?
Yep, I support it. Makes sense.
Okay. What you need on that one?
Yes, thank you, Chair, Commissioners. Okay, one more. This is section 9.27, which is the expedited review of plans incentive. As currently written in the OHO, this is an incentive available to developers who have proposed developments in the Gateway area, which is a geographic area to the west and southwest of the South Loop area. If they provide a development in the Gateway area with 15% of total dwelling units at 60% area median income, they may be moved to the front of review queue for building permit applications. The proposed change, to give background, the Gateway area as a priority for the city is not a priority area anymore in terms of ordinance. So as you may have seen in the minor amendments and clarification section, references to the Gateway area are being removed from the OHO. So in reviewing this particular incentive, which is hinged on the Gateway area, we wanted to see if there was a way to retool it to incentivize those 30% AMI units. So in this case, the proposed change would be expanding the incentive citywide, and if developers were to provide any amount of affordable units at or below 30% AMI, that they would be eligible to move to the front of the review queue. For your consideration, is this an appropriate, is providing any amount of units an affordable baseline, or should there be a minimum percentage, or any other considerations with this? And I had meant to mention earlier on with my background to the OHO, but these requirements apply to developments with 20 or more units. If a development has fewer than 20 units, they may essentially elect to be subject to the requirements of the OHO so that they may have access to the incentives. But in considering these amendments, it's primarily for developments of 20 units and above.
Do we know, on average, what's the practical effect of moving to the front? Is it a 2-week, 2-month, 2-year?
Yeah, Chair Roman, it varies, of course, but generally speaking, it's 1 to 2 weeks in queue, so 1 to 2 week time savings theoretically.
So it's more of a, sounds good.
Have people used this in the past?
Chair and Commissioners, I'm going to the slide that says that for the...
Well, there it is.
I'm trying to locate it now.
About the 5th, 6th one, or 8th?
Yes, thank you. Expedited review of plans, 30% of developments utilize that, and we can see the list here of which developments utilize that. So it was that 9.27. So that's 4 developments that have utilized that incentive.
Just looking at this, I'm a huge supporter of moving this citywide. One of your prior questions was around segregation and making sure that we're equitable throughout our city. And the first thing I read was, well, we're going to prioritize these lower incomes into one location within the city, and that just doesn't feel right to me. So citywide, 100% behind that.
I think this is fine. I think it's more of a feel good change than a practical change. But
Yeah, Mr. Chair, when I heard 2 weeks, to me, this is, I don't know, it doesn't feel that big of a deal. As someone who used to be in the design world and work with developments, I mean, 2 weeks can happen because a bolt was the wrong size. I mean, it's like 2 weeks. If it was 6 months, I'd feel more strongly about it, but I'll just take staff's recommendation on this one.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. So those were the specific considerations that I wanted to bring before the Planning Commission tonight, but I would open to any feedback that you have on anything we covered or anything in the staff report. I also wanted to share feedback from the Port Authority on Tuesday. To summarize the ideas that were shared, Port Authority recommends that we be thoughtful about how compliance is undertaken with regard to developers and property managers in meeting the requirements of the OHO, especially pertaining to additional amendments that we are proposing here. One in specific that was discussed is expansion of the OHO objective for comparable design of market rate units and affordable units to include in-unit amenities. So the proposal in that case was, for example, if a market rate unit has a balcony or in-unit laundry, that a comparable amount of affordable units in that same development have access to those amenities. So the Port Authority wanted to stress that if we're going to leverage these requirements, that we be able to ensure compliance with them. They also shared to ensure that amendments to the OHO do not purposelessly restrict the city's interaction with developers throughout the development process. So allowing the city to remain flexible in negotiations with developers. So I wanted to share those takeaways from that Tuesday meeting and then open it up.
can you, and I know we've talked about this probably back when we first did OHO, but when developers bring us a plan, are the specific units that meet the requirement, are those typically identified at the time of the plan?
Chair, Commission, do you mean within the site plan?
Yeah, so like you have a floor plan, and do they generally say these are where we're putting the units or not?
Chair and Commission, it's not a requirement that that be done because it's, if a market rate unit is to turn over, if an OHO unit were to turn over, it would be acceptable for a market rate unit to move into that unit or vice versa. I have seen a case where a developer close to opening had designated their initial allocation of those affordable units within that development, and we reviewed that to ensure that there wasn't a segregation of those units to, say, one floor or one part of that building. That wasn't the case, and the intention is that as those units turn over, that they can switch throughout the building. The requirement is that a proportional amount of bedroom types is given to affordable units in comparison to market rate units, so that there's a comparable amount of 1 beds, 2 beds, 3 beds, et cetera, that affordable units have access to than market rate.
Okay. The reason I asked the question is, I will give an example, and I'm not calling out this development for anything that they've done because they're not open. We have the Enclave project at 82nd and 35W. So you've got a building that two sides faces a reliever and an arterial. And as I've watched it go up, they're doing a very nice job on it. It's a very big improvement to that area. But I got thinking, what's to stop you from putting all of the affordable units facing the fine particulates from the freeway, and the market rate units get the quiet side facing, James. So that was more of my question about, are we also thinking about how do we make sure that, certainly to Commissioner Cookson's point, people are glad to have a place they can afford, but I also want to make sure that we're not unintentionally giving the less desirable spaces to the people who, just because of their financial circumstance. Again, nothing necessarily to fix right now. It was something that kind of has bubbled in my mind as I've been by there. Yeah, Commissioner Cook.
Well, just a quick comment. I thought that was already in. I thought the developers did have to tell us where they were going to go, and they had to be dispersed.
It was a refresher question for me because I didn't really remember.
So just so I'm clear, is that the case, or is that not the case today? Maybe Mr. Markegard could help.
Yes, Chairwoman Commissioner Cookton, I know that that's come up in past developments. An example of that was the Riser development. There they did 9% affordable senior. And they have kind of dramatic river views on one side and city views on the other. And there, the city required, a mixture that you didn't have them all facing one direction. So similar to them not all being on the same floor and they not all be the same, bedroom size. Also, placement within the building be kind of equitable.
Great, but that third part is not currently a requirement, or it is?
I believe it is
Okay.
in the, yeah.
Okay. And again, I asked the question not because I'm finding any fault with that development. It was just, it's occurred to me as I've driven by there, I thought there's clearly some more, depending on your, some people might love to watch the traffic and the construction that's going to be starting at 35W. But I just got thinking that for some people, that could be a less desirable place, and it may be put there unintentionally.
Well put, Mr. Chair. Thanks. Mr. Niemeyer, I do have a question about unit equality with the finishes that you brought up. When we are we getting pushback from developers? Maybe you're not even the right person to ask, but are you aware? Are we getting pushback from developers on that, or is that generally okay?
Chair and Commissioners, as far as I have heard, no. And Jason is shaking his head in agreement.
Chairwoman, Commissioners, as of right now, the number of developments that we have worked with, the developers want to have that flexibility to be able to move those apartments around, as Kenny Niemeyer was talking about here. And so, as far as staff is aware, all of the units have pretty much the same amenities. Some one bedrooms may have a breakfast bar where another one has a seating area for a dining room, and those just get intermixed as the units turn over with the developer.
Okay, thank you.
Other general questions, comments? Commissioner Goldsmith?
Just one last thing, and just as a thank you to staff for bringing this back to us. Like you said, it's a living, breathing document, and I want to make sure that we keep abreast of the market as well as our resident and neighbors' needs as well. So thank you for bringing it back to us.
Commissioner Cookton?
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm going to pull one more out. We've asked this before, but can you remind us how area median income is calculated? Is that for the city of Bloomington? Is that the 7-county metro area? I got to say, I was shocked to see that it's currently $125,000.
Chair and Commissioners, so for Bloomington, we're part of the Minneapolis-St. Paul Bloomington Metropolitan Statistical Area, which is, I believe it's the 7-county metro, and that includes portions of Wisconsin as well as part of that metro area. And HUD calculates that AMI level and disseminates that to Met Council, and they create the rent limits that we use in that case. So we are part of that greater area, and I was just doing some research on this for some housing-related work that if we were to focus down on Bloomington's area median income, it would be around, I believe it was around 24% less than the metro area. So if there were more of a localization of how AMI is calculated, then there would be a more strict requirement in terms of rent that Bloomington residents could benefit from.
Is it at our discretion how we calculate AMI, or are we under somebody else's purview on that?
Chair and Commissioners, in relation to financial subsidy, a lot of our financial sources they have those requirements set by HUD or by Met Council or by Hennepin County. In all those cases, we don't have discretion.
Mr. Chair, I'm just thinking of a scenario where I'm trying my darndest to get affordable rent, and I'm looking at 60% AMI and going, geez, I don't make 125,000. 75% of Bloomington does it, or whatever does it. So it's unfortunate that we can't calculate it from a city perspective.
Well, and that's also the question of, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off prematurely, or at all. And that's the question too about the Bloomington AMI. Is that the people who live in Bloomington, or is that the jobs that are available in Bloomington? Because we've had conversation before about the jobs that are available in Bloomington. We have we have a lot of jobs, which is a good thing. We have a range of jobs, but we have a lot of jobs here, and we have a lot of jobs here. And so we've often talked about, can people who work in Bloomington afford to live in Bloomington? So I wasn't sure if that Bloomington income is based on the people who live in Bloomington, or is it based on the jobs that are here?
Chair and Commissioners, what I was reviewing was American Community Survey census data, and that would have been for households in
People who live
Bloomington.
here. Okay. Yeah, I think that MSA even bleeds like way down, like even into like Belle Plaine. You're down into like some like the Seward County stuff. I mean, it's a big blanket. Anyways, did you get what you needed from us?
Chair, Commissioners, thank you. Yeah, this was extremely helpful, and I appreciate all your input and feedback, and I'll be back in front of you sometime in February. Well, not sometime, an exact date in February. I will be back.
February 15th.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 5, consider the Planning Commission synopsis from November 16th. Planning Commissioner Albrecht was not here, and Planning Commissioner Issa was not on the commission at that point. So that does leave 4 of us, so this time we can vote on it. So I'd look for a motion on November 16th.
Motion to move to approve the draft Planning Commission meeting synopsis from November 16th, 2023 as presented.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes. Item 6, Planning Commission Policy and Issue Update. Planning Manager Markegard.
Chair Roman, Commissioners, our next meeting is February 1st, and we have 4 items on that agenda so far. One that you continued to that meeting, the Enclave Company's multifamily residential and daycare proposal. It's at 6701 West 78th Street. Also, we have our City Code Amendment public hearing on the sign code updates. And then 2 study items, one on environmental standards specific to low-density residential areas, and secondly, amendments to RS1 zoning district standards. So that's on February 1st. February 15th, so far our only item is the one we talked about tonight, coming back as a public hearing, amendments to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance. So that's what we have coming up.
All right. Anything anyone on the commission would like to bring forward? I will, again, I mentioned briefly, but we had the work plan in front of the City Council. We brought forward the work plan that the commission recommended approval at the end of December. There was interest on the part of the council to spend time digging into an analysis of our rules and regulations that may be disproportionately impacting small business development. And so the council asked for having that added. And what that meant is that the multifamily standards came off and will not be on the priority list for the 2024 work plan. But otherwise, the work plan is as we discussed.
Is that also the pickup window?
Yeah, sorry, pickup window standards as well. But again, that may be a question of, parking standards was one item that may have potentially been bumped as well. But I could envision something like that perhaps falling at least loosely into the realm of small business. So I myself haven't given up on that one entirely. But the council was less concerned about pickup window standards. Felt like maybe it was more of a pandemic vestige. Anyways, that's what I have from that meeting. Anything else? All right, seeing none, we are adjourned until February 1st.